Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 2023 FMDiSC meeting. I'm your host, Bob Shockey. Normally, I'm hosting from my home or my office in Southern California, but today I'm coming to you from Tucson, so we get a better background than I usually have. We've got some great guests today, some great speakers, I should say. First of all, we're hopefully going to have Doug Wallis and Ronnie Rios, who I don't see here, but oh, there you are. Thank you. Okay, sorry. And they're going to be talking about FileMaker 2023. So that's exciting. Then after that, we're going to have Jonathan Stark, who is going to talk about being an old dog and learning new tricks. And following that, we're going to have some breakout rooms and announcements. And then Jeremy Brown will be rounding things up with thinking inside the WebViewer. So some really great content today. And happy to have you all here. Thank you to our presenters for being here today. All right. And with no further ado, then I'm going to turn it over
to mute during the presentations.
Oh yes, everyone, please mute yourselves during the presentation.
Unless you want to talk.
It really helps. Doug, Ronnie, which of you needs screen sharing, or do you both?
It's me first, and then Ronnie for a couple of minutes.
All right, great. Let me give you permission to do that. And there we go. You should have it now, and take it away.
Yeah, well, great. Cool. Morning, everyone. So thank you for coming to this great session. So myself, Douglas Wallis, Ronnie Rios, and Rosemary, we're going to talk about FileMaker 2023, the latest version of FileMaker that we released roughly about 3 weeks ago now. So my name is Doug Wallis. I'm the product manager for FileMaker, working closely with Rick Hellman and people that Claire, Lucy Chen, anyone that basically has been working on FileMaker for a long time. Been at FileMaker Claris for about 8.5 years now, coming to 9 years. You guessed it from my accent. I'm actually French with a British name. I'm actually based on the west coast of France, but working mainly with US hours. So we're going to talk about Claris FileMaker 2023. While we've actually done it, some of the work that we've been doing for the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months, and some of the new features that we put into the product. So essentially, FileMaker 2023, product version being FileMaker 20.1, in case you're wondering, is an extension of what we've been doing since we launched FileMaker 19, roughly pretty much 3 years ago now. The idea was to actually have FileMaker an open platform. So the idea is we want to make sure that people understand the positioning of Claris with a FileMaker tool is that it doesn't do everything for your company. It's part of everything that actually is around it. So we want to make sure that it can live with other technologies, that it can talk with other systems. And what we work on is to make it easier for you to be able to actually sort of talk with other systems out there. So when we launched FileMaker 19, over the last 3 years, we work essentially on getting JavaScript implementation inside the WebViewer, be able to actually get all of that to actually work better. And a lot of the work that we are doing on the FileMaker platform, while we are building more on Connect and Studio, is to continue to improve what we have in FileMaker that's been there for a very long time. In order to be able to actually do that, we fix a lot of bugs. But the other thing that we do on top of that is we are improving some of the third-party tools that actually are within FileMaker to make it better. The reason for that is we want to basically your solution to keep on working. We want to make it actually work better until you could actually use maybe some of the excellent stuff that we'll have in Studio or some of the features that we have in Connect. So we're not dropping anything in FileMaker. We're just trying to actually make it better over the years so that you can actually keep on using it and use your skills to actually make even better apps. This is a quick quote from Josh that everyone knows. But on average, from everyone we've actually talked to, from all the sort of meetings we've done with user group, everyone basically liked what we've actually done in terms of fixing a lot of bugs and making some of the features that we have in the product work a lot better for you over the years. So we're going to start on the FileMaker Pro side of it. Then we'll talk about FileMaker Server, and then we'll have a bit of stuff on Claris Connect. So the first feature that we actually added to FileMaker 2023 is what we call the on-window transaction script trigger. So it came about when we started opening up transaction in FileMaker. So transaction FileMaker have been there for a very long time, pretty much in FileMaker 7, but it was kind of a closed environment where the developer didn't actually have that much control over what they can do with the transactions. Basically, FileMaker was doing all the heavy work, and it was kind of hard for the developer to be able to actually either get information from transaction or actually be able to actually either control what information was going through the transaction. So with FileMaker 19.6, we brought in three new script steps around transaction. So you can open transaction, revert, and commit, where we give the user the option to be able to not allow the data to be actually sent to the data file if there is an issue with data or whatever you want to do. And while the work was being done on this, Claire, who basically works on this type of stuff, actually sort of came with the idea of how about we basically grab some of the data that's coming out through when the transaction is actually occurring, and we actually give that information back to the end user so that they can actually sort of pretty much do whatever they want with it. Essentially, the idea behind it is for you to be able to create an audit logging tracking system inside your solution. I think there's around 20 or 25 on the market that have been done over the years, but the idea is that we make it a lot easier for you to be able to actually sort of kind of grab the information when a transaction is actually occurring. So it's a script trigger, so it's basically on the file, so you don't actually have to do it for every layout. It runs across the file. And as the wording says, it's basically is when the transaction on the window you're looking at actually occurs. So it's very similar to when on record commit basically happens, but it's across the file. And what it's going to do basically is it's going to grab a bit of data in a JSON format that you can actually get through the script parameter, where essentially we give you some information about a transaction. So we're going to give you the name of the file where the transaction occurs, the name of the table where the transaction is happening, the operation. So there's three statuses. There's basically new, modified, and deleted. And then a field name or field basically where you could have any type of information that you want to use. So the work that as a developer you'll have to do is around the information that is actually located in a field. So this is the quick sort of screenshot of how the JSON actually look like. So you have basically the file name, table name, the operation, the record ID, so I've got the record ID, and then that field where it could be a calculation of everything that you have around it, or it could be something different. So I'm going to do a quick demo of a file that we actually created for testing purposes. And it's based on also a blog entry that we've actually created where we go through explaining what you could do with it, how you could actually play around with it, and the power that it has. So this file basically has a number of various sort of FileMaker fields. You got text, all the sort of basic ones. And then we've got a noted log where essentially what we're grabbing is the data that was the original data and the data that was actually modified. So in order to be able to actually do that, we've actually created a custom function where we are grabbing inside a custom function what was there before, so the data that was in the field before, and the data is actually after that. If you go through the blog, it goes through everything around it. But there's a number of developers that have already created blogs that explain everything. You have files, so you can actually play around with it. So in the case basically is when I create a new entry, so I'm just going to basically create a random record, fill in all the information, and when it's running at the same time, it basically everything goes into a JSON file, and then this is the JSON file that basically up on that. You could put it into a JSON file on the desktop. You could put it anywhere. It could actually go directly into the server on the file. After that, basically, it's up to you to actually get your brain to actually go completely mad and do whatever you want. But just knowing that it has a lot of power. So as you can see from this one, this is all the information I've actually put in my field name, which is called audit log. That's actually tracking all the changes that I've done. Kind of straightforward, but you can do a lot of stuff with it. It works both in find and in browse mode. So you'll just be careful that the record ID will be based on the mode you run. So if you are in browse mode, it will just give you the record ID. If you go in find mode, it will go the record ID of that find. So the first one will be 1, and then on and on from that. So kind of straightforward. I invite you to look at the blog entry. Has a lot of instant information inside that. Oops, lost my keynote. The next one that we put inside was a couple of extra functions that we added to be able to actually make it easier for you to support word logging, especially when you have large systems. So they basically will give you a list of database tables that you have in your file, the table IDs, and then where to get the table base name. So it's basically helping you to be able to actually make a audit logging system, especially if you have big ones that got multiple files, that should be able to actually retrieve better data across the line. Next one, it's not a new feature. It's an enhancement to a feature that has been in FileMaker for a very long time. And it's around essentially security changes that have been coming in from Microsoft and Google. So previously with the send mail, you could use either the client that's actually on the desktop of the user, or you can use an SMTP server. For roughly basically a couple of years now, Microsoft and Google, we've been trying to actually sort of have a more secure environment. And the way to be able to do that is actually get the authentication to be done through a Auth2 sort of system versus just using simple SMTP server. So we added basically this new option inside of the script step. The easier part basically is to fill in the form inside the FileMaker. So when you go through the option of Google or Microsoft, we actually basically the name of the user, everything actually works with the calc engine. So you can actually have whatever system you want in that. And you pretty much need some sensitive information that Google and Microsoft are going to basically give you back through their console. So the FileMaker side is easy. The hard part is the Microsoft and the Google side of it. Depending on the type of contract that you have and how your system is actually set up, it is sometimes kind of hard to be able to actually find whether it's the shared key or the private key or some of that information. We are working with our engineers and our information development team on writing a blog that's going to be able to actually go through in pretty much, we think, most of the option settings that you have, whether it's Microsoft or Google, so that you can follow the information that we provide you so that you can actually grab the right information to put back into the FileMaker solution. It's going to be a long document, so I apologize ahead of time if it's actually kind of a pain to go through, but at least you'll have all the information to be able to actually do that. If that doesn't work for you, or if it's too much information, sometimes it can be a pain, I invite you to actually try Claris Connect, because with Claris Connect, you will be able to actually use a flow to actually talk back to Outlook especially, and be able to actually send email that way if you want to as well. Next one is a new script step. So it's not a addition to what we had before. It's actually a new one. It's called Perform Script on Server with Callback. The reason we actually didn't actually put it as an option with the PSOS scripts that we had before is to make sure that we keep your system working from all the generation of FileMaker, and then any extra work that we do, whether it's on the normal PSOS or this one, will actually keep on working. So we don't actually create issues for developers, and we came up with this vision of actually having two different script sets. What it does basically is what it basically says. It will perform a script on the server. Once the script has been done by the server script engine, it will basically send a callback to the client, and the client will be able to run a script. It works on Pro, it works on Go and WebDirect, and the callback can be pretty much anything. So you could actually get your system to run import a spreadsheet of millions of records. When it's done, it will actually sort of come back to the client and actually tell them that run whatever script they actually have after that. The only thing is you have to actually have the file still open. So if you close the file, it's not going to be able to actually do the callback script. But if you're working on a different file, it will basically just run either on the background or the foreground, depending on what your callback script actually does. So kind of straightforward, very nice little tool for a lot of work. So we have a lot of sort of enhancements that we put into the product. There's a couple of features that we have actually extended to make it easier for you. Essentially, we've been working heavily on security for the FileMaker 2023 release. So we are supporting pretty much, I would say, sort of across everything OpenSSL 3.0.8. The only version that is not basically supporting that is Ubuntu 20, because Ubuntu 20 came before OpenSSL 3.0 came out. And so if you really want to have a secure system, I invite you to actually move as quickly as possible to the Ubuntu 22. We've extended the function of read QR code to work properly on FileMaker Pro on Windows, and to work as well on FileMaker Server on Ubuntu and Windows. We are now supporting Get Live Text on the FileMaker Server, and we've added 3 extra languages, which are Japanese, Korean, and Ukrainian. We've made some improvement to thumbnail generation on Windows. So we use a tool called PDF which is going to help us sort of create better generation. We improved the various tools that we use to do sort of PDFs, both on Ubuntu and Windows. So we're hoping that a lot of the issues that people actually have with PDFs will be resolved with that. We finally supporting our dark mode on the relation graph. And we've added on the execute FileMaker data API support for date format parameters, pretty much useful for people that actually mixing European languages or other languages from English and various locales, especially if you do stuff with Australian and UK parameters, just to make sure everything works better. We have a list of bug fixes. It's about 500, so actually vaguely a bit more than that. We're not going to give you a whole list of all the bugs that we fixed. If you look at the release note of FileMaker Pro, we talk about sort of the major ones, some actually tiny. If there is one that basically keeps on bugging you that you would like us to fix, or that you think we fix it but not the right way, I invite you to actually go through, send an email to us or Rosemary or myself, and then we'll basically try to actually sort of dig a bit more into it just to see how we can fix those extra bugs. Quick sort of update that we've done. So we hadn't modified this for a very long time. We've added the new sizes of the stencil inside the FileMaker Pro. So now we have the new sizes for new iPhones and new iPads to make it easier for you to actually be able to actually create that. There is a knowledge-based article on our website that will actually update as well, because it doesn't mention all the new sizes, but really useful if you want to do canvas sizes for your iPhones and your iPads. So in terms of support for FileMaker Pro, we are supporting the last 2 versions of macOS, so 13.0 and 12.0. And we are supporting the latest 2 updates of Windows 11 and 10, which is the 2022 second half update version. In terms of the host, the FileMaker Pro server will work on 20.1, 19.6, 19.5, and 19.4.2. So all the customers with a version prior to those will not be able to actually connect to a FileMaker server. So just make sure that you update maybe your clients before actually updating the server. FileMaker Cloud 2.20 will actually be coming in the near future. And the same, it will be basically only compatible with those last 4 versions. So if you are running FileMaker Cloud with the current 19 version and using especially on the Mac, because for Windows 19.4 2.1 is the only one that actually works. But if you're using older version on FileMaker and FileMaker Pro, I invite you to actually update those 2 latest versions of FileMaker before we actually get the update of FileMaker Cloud 2.20 in market. And now we're going to go into the FileMaker server side of it and just see some of the updates that we've actually done across the board. So the stuff that I normally say to all the dev groups, one of the things that we are trying to do, and I know that I had some emails from people that are basically saying, you shouldn't say that, but I keep on saying it. We are trying to make sort of FileMaker server very boring. So once you've actually installed it, once you've actually set up your groups, you've done your custom OAuth settings, you've done your backup, your schedule, you basically have the FileMaker server running, and you just need to go sometimes to just check that everything's fine. But we should make sure that that the server that we offer you works without having you to actually spend a lot of time fixing some of the issues. So we are trying to make it boring. Like it works, you run it, and you don't actually have to spend too much time figuring out what stuff are actually not working. So what we've been doing is actually working on the scale and performance of FileMaker server to really make it easier for people to actually have a better system. One thing that we did basically was to increase the amount of file that you can actually host on one FileMaker server. We went from 125 to 256. In a lot of cases, it's not going to change everyone's life, but there are a number of Claris partners, especially the SBA providers, so Solution Partner Agreement partners, that do hosting for a lot of customers. For them, it's going to be a lot better because that way they're going to be able to actually have more customer per server. So it's going to basically ease their cost in terms of actually hardware. The next part that we've been working heavily on is WebDirect. So the two aspects basically that we're trying to actually get of WebDirect is we want to be able to offer you the option to actually have more connection at any one time of WebDirect users. And at the same time is we want the performance of even if you have low amount of users on WebDirect to be more stable, to remove pretty much anything like ghost sessions and issues with slow issues on WebDirect. So we've done two pieces of work. One thing is was to update the Java that we use. So we moved from Java 11 to Java 17. This is helping us have a more stable environment, fixing a lot of the issues that have been there in Java for a long time. And the other thing to be able to actually get 1,000 users is we've been working, especially on the Ubuntu side, to leverage the power of Nginx with a load balancer to be able to actually increase the amount of users that we can offer on one system. So you can go up to 1,000 users if you use Ubuntu. If you go to the Mac or Windows, you will be able to pretty much get between 500 to 750. We are still working to be able to actually increase that number to 1,000. But at the same time is if you have, let's say 50 or 75 users on the WebDirect system, because we've made improvement to the core engine itself, you'll have better stability even if you're actually on the lower end of that. So it's good for actually have a lot of users, but it's good as well if you're on the lower end. We are supporting now Intel and Intel processor for Ubuntu 22. So now you could actually run on a Mac Mini virtualize the Ubuntu version of FileMaker server. We've updated the Node.js to version 18 for the API and Dynamic Console just to make everything works a little better. And we've added two new scripts, log systems inside the Dynamic Console, around the script errors, and the other one is around, can't remember, I'll have to come back to that. But basically giving more information when you are logging or when you have issues with your system. So we've done some tests just to make sure that we know we could actually get to 1,000. So we've run sort of tests for about months and a half, whereby we test how many we can get. So the average number we get is between 1,020 to 1,050, but pretty much you'll be safe to actually be able to actually get to 1,000 users. Now, the way to be able to actually do that is to have multiple secondary machine plug into your primary machine. Essentially, the number of connection you're going to be able to actually get on the secondary machine is roughly between 90 and 120. 120 be the maximum if you have like the hardware that can actually support that. So if you need 1,000 users, you pretty much basically will need one primary machine running a data server and then 10 secondary machine on the side. Obviously, if you run this type of systems, we suggest using Dockers or virtualized environment to make it easier for you to be able to actually run all of that. And you'll need an Nginx load balancer on top of that to get all that system running properly. Again, we have a blog sort of entry from engineering sort of team that goes through how to set up all that system. It's kind of straightforward, but obviously there's quite a bit of few machines that will be running at the same time. So you have to actually make sure that your system is actually properly set up. So the average for the test that we do is we try to get about 110 connection per user per machine to get the whole system working properly. The next step that we're working on is stability, and basically is how do we avoid as much as we can database corruption? How do we avoid any issues when you have power outage or when the FM processor basically crashes? And at the same time, it's making it easier to be able to actually work on the admin console while the database engine is off, and potentially be able to make it easier for you to actually update FileMaker server within the admin console. So this is the long-term journey that we are trying to get to. So a more stable environment, so that you can do the more stuff, and you can do a lot of the work that you have to do when you're maintaining files for either yourself or your customer, and be able to actually avoid losing data. The persistent cache works, has two options. The first one is just to enable basically this persistent cache. And the other one is to be able to actually sync that cache with the hard disk or the SSD if you're driving. So the way we're actually doing it is we are splitting the amount of memory that you're assigning to your FileMaker server into two new caches. So one is the normal cache that you have and you've been having in FileMaker for a long time. And the other one is that persistent cache. So whenever you are writing, or transactions are being written from the cache to the data file, or from the client to the cache and the data file, we'll write the same transaction to two different caches, one being the FileMaker cache, the other one being the persistent cache. So if your FileMaker server crashes, you'll still basically have that persistent cache backed up on the side. When FileMaker server restarts, it will basically get the information from the cache and rebuild basically your data file in the background without any issues. If you want extra security, you can enable the cache to be saved or synchronized with disk, and so that'll basically give you extra safety. It's disabled by default. You have to basically enable it through the admin console or the CLI or the admin API. It's a quick FileMaker restart to actually be able to actually do that. It's going to have a tiny bit on your system, because obviously we are writing the cache twice. So we are writing to the FileMaker normal cache and a persistent cache. So you might experience a small drop, roughly I'd say 2 to 5% maybe drop in terms of speed issues, but at least it's giving you less potential database corruption. But that being said, it's not going to erase any type of database corruption, but at least it's going to basically minimize as much as we can any of those issues. The next one is we've done some update to the OData protocol, essentially around how you manage related entities, and come the option to be able to actually do patches, deletes, and post queries around the idea of related values on specific record. If you've never tried the data, it's really nice because it has a lot of power. And essentially, there is a lot of traction in the FileMaker world when we're getting new developers that are actually not really into FileMaker, but being asked to actually talk to FileMaker. A lot of those users actually do use the OData protocol, because for them, it's easier to be able to actually figure out how it works, and they don't actually have to actually know how FileMaker works all the time. With OData, you're not actually having to create layouts or figure out some of the stuff that actually FileMaker does. You can talk directly to the tables and say, it's an instance. It's actually a lot easier for that. We've gone through the compliance to actually be compliant with OData 4.0.1. There's a long list on the OData website that actually tells everything around it, but pretty much it's kind of a nice feature for people using OData. Next one is a tool that we've added. So by having more users on the web development environment, we had to find ways to be able to remove issues coming from Java. So we know that Java has issues. Some of them we can control, other a bit more annoying. Essentially, the biggest issue that we have with Java is when the memory of Java goes ballistic, and the heaps of memory goes in. You can't control it anymore. It takes pretty much over the machine. Everything scrolls to dead speed. Not a lot you can do. You have to actually go, whether it's on the Mac or Windows, you have to actually try to figure out where you can actually remove the memory from Java, but that takes a bit of pain. So we created basically two new scripts, system script inside the admin console, so that you could actually, what we called basically, remove the garbage that Java is creating. So you have an option to be able to actually use the script step either on the primary machine if it's running on its own, or on the secondary machine through that script step. There is a button as well on the admin section under the Web Direct tab where you could actually do it manually for every secondary machine or the primary machine if you need to actually be able to actually do that. It's going to require JDK 17 to be installed on your machine. Again, there is a blog entry on the engineering blog that goes through kind of what it does. And on top of that, we offer you 4 different ways to run the collection. So there's various number of tools out there on the market. We've actually put them inside this garbage sort of collection tool. And depending on your needs, you'll be able to actually use one of the 4 tools that we provide. The generic one is called the G1 garbage collection. It basically is the quickest one. It just does normally one thing. It's going to basically delete the memory footprint that Java is using, and will give the memory back to the system. There are the others. Some is more specific to actually making sure less data is being lost, but it's basically trying to figure out how to actually retrieve more data. So go through the log to find the one that actually works better for you. The one thing that basically, just to sort of take a note on when we did the update. So FileMaker 19.6 was using Java 11. We've moved to 17. And so in order for your system to actually work properly, what we are doing is the Java folder that was inside the FileMaker server folder on your machine, we are removing the Java 11 basically JR that we're actually using to be able to actually use the full Java 17 tools that we need. But if you have a Java version, Java 11 running somewhere on your FileMaker machine, so the hardware itself, we're not going to be able to actually touch that because you might be using for something else. So you probably, if you are using your FileMaker server hardware for 2 different things, you might find that there's a Java 17 and a Java 11 on your machine, but we just use the one that is on your FileMaker server, and we're not touching the rest. Next one is a preview. We are adding external authentication through directory services for Ubuntu. Previously, you had to go through Active Directory file services. Now, basically, you can use the normal directory system. It's kind of straightforward. You can do through the admin console, and it allows you to create the groups, make sure to actually grab information from Eddie on the side, and then get your users to go actually use that. The reason it's in preview is there might be some quick changes that we do, but the idea behind it will stay the same, and so nothing to worry about. Next one is, so we've been trying to make the backup environment the best we can by giving you extra tools and stability to make your life a lot easier. So in 19.6, we gave you the option to be able to actually cancel a backup. And through popular demand and from backup from developers, there was a request saying, well, actually, sometime I would need to be able to keep my cancel backup. I might have actually started it and I had to stop it for whatever reason. There was whatever issue. So what we've done now is we allow you to be able to keep your cancel backup. They will go into your backup folder. There's a specific folder for that. And the naming convention will be canceled with the date. And so you could easily retrieve that backup if you need to be able to actually do anything with that. So we try to actually give you as many tools that we can run your backup world to make it easier as we can. So this is the overview of all the new features that we put into FileMaker Server, persistent catch. So there's 2 new log entries, around the script event, and then the other one around the script engine, script errors. We've added a new function on the data API. You can do save as PDF, which is very useful. We fixed an issue on the schedule name limit. Before it used to be 32 characters. We've increased that to 100 characters. In the Ubuntu 20, or same for any of the Ubuntu sort of install, there is a folder called tools. Inside that, you'll be able to actually find the Docker script, and you'll be able to actually find as well the Python script to do the PKI authentication for the admin console as well. We've added some improvement as well for users moving from FileMaker Server 16, migrating to 26. So when you have a FileMaker Server 16, when you are exporting your settings, your admin groups, all of those groups and all the settings will now import properly back into your FileMaker Server 2023. So once you basically grab all that information from your old servers to the new server, you'll pretty much have your equivalent machine back on track with everything that was needed from that. And with that now, going quickly through the technical specs. So supporting, same as the Pro, for the Mac is the last 2 versions, so Ventura and Monterey. For Windows, we are supporting Windows Server 2022, both on the standard and the data center. There's a need for the desktop experience to be able to actually sort of make sure everything works properly. And for Linux, we are supporting Ubuntu 20 and Ubuntu 22, both the server and the desktop. Desktop is if you need to actually have a GUI to be able to actually see what you're doing. But on average, we kind of say that it's sometimes easier just to use the server version. The ARM version is only available on Ubuntu 22. And then so the Intel is for Ubuntu 20 and Ubuntu 22. And for the client, I was mentioning before, support is for 20.1, 19.6, 19.5, and 19.4.2. So now I'm going to hand over to Ronnie, who's going to talk about Claris Connect.
Doug? All right, share my screen over here. And I only got about 3 slides, but I think they're important. I think they're good. So, all right, well, let's actually start talking here about Claris Connect and the things that we've been introducing here with the launch of FileMaker 2023. And let's get started with talking about free software. So we're with the introduction of the launch of FileMaker 2023, we've also introduced a new free plan of Claris Connect. So you have no excuse now of not using Claris Connect, but this is exactly why we're introducing. We wanted to make sure that we remove any roadblocks you might have for testing out and trying out Claris Connect. We really believe that there is no applications right now that live out in a silo. There's no way that a successful application can live by itself without talking to the rest of the world. And that's where Claris Connect comes in, right? Making it a lot easier for you to take your existing solutions, and have it reach out and talk with all different other systems through API, but not just making it easy, but also taking your integrations and moving it to an environment that is very fast, is scalable, and also helps you manage a lot of the security, so you don't have to replicate all of those integrations. And to help you with that, I'm going to talk about one of the features that we introduced here with FileMaker 2023 to help you in that. So when we introduced Claris Connect a couple of years ago, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we want to make sure that all of our applications talked very well to one another. And we've had FileMaker server connectors from the very beginning, but when we started asking customers and partners, what are the main challenges that you have right now in getting your FileMaker solutions talking or integrating through Claris Connect? And over, we kept on hearing, well, triggering a flow from FileMaker, and understandably so, it requires several steps, even though it's fairly straightforward, but there are several steps that you have to do, and you have to go back and forth between Claris Connect and FileMaker. So what we did was that with FileMaker 2023, we introduced a new script step, appropriately named Trigger Claris Connect Flow. And it does exactly what the name implies. It's a script step that allows you to trigger a Claris Connect Flow directly from directly from the scripting environment without having to use all the different configurations and using the insert from URL script step that you normally use. This is an example of a existing script from one of our partners using a traditional integration with an API, right? Handling all the authentication using insert from URL script step. And he decided to test what it would look like if he migrated this script over to Claris Connect and let Claris Connect take over those things. And the significance here, the reduction of complexity in that script was dramatic. Not only is it a lot smaller, a lot more efficient, but it also, the integration now is much more portable because everything now lives in Connect. Replicating this doesn't require having to take this entire script, copying and pasting it across multiple files and having to update multiple scripts along all those solutions. But you've got one single point where you can go take care of those things. And also, again, offloading the complexity of the integration off to Claris Connect. So I'm going to try to do a quick live demo here. So bear with me and let's see if we can get this working. So this is Claris Connect. I've actually already created a flow. And I've added
sorry, Raz.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought this was. So I already have the trigger here. This is the trigger for the FileMaker server connector, which is triggered by script. And if I open this up over here, you'll see all the steps that you would normally have to take here before FileMaker 2023. So there's several things that you'd have to do. You have to copy this URL, go into your script, adding an insert from URL script step, having to place a particular JSON object there that has it formatted in a very particular way, configure the curl options in insert from URL script step. So there's several steps that have to happen there, and they all have to be perfect, right? If you miss anything, it doesn't work. So I'm going to copy this URL, which I'll still need, and take it over here to FileMaker and add the new script step here, trigger Claris Connect Flow. And I'm gonna hit return here. And if you've noticed, I'll zoom in here a little bit, that it automatically took the URL that I copied from Claris Connect. So no, it's a URL there. It's automatically pasted in there. Now, next thing I'm going to need is that normally is a JSON object. If I'm not using FileMaker 2023, I would have to use insert from URL script step and send a particular JSON object in there. I don't have to worry about those things anymore. But if I want to send a JSON object, we've created a separate parameter here in this script step, and you can use any, it's a regular calculation, use the calc engine over here, and you can use all the available tools here in the calc engine to create your JSON. Honestly, you're probably going to want to use the built-in JSON functions here to make it a lot easier, but you can send any data here. You can build this JSON object in whichever way you want, and whatever you put in here will be sent to that flow, and it'll be able to be used by all the other steps in that flow. So you'll be able to use these as parameter. Again, the structure of this JSON object could be completely custom, include any type of information that you want in there. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go ahead back over here into Connect, and I'm going to add another script step or another step over here. Maybe we want to let everybody know here on Slack that we're running this. I'll use this account. I'll use this channel, and then the message will be something that comes from FileMaker. I'll save over here. Let's enable this, and I'll go back here to FileMaker. I want to just run this script, and the script runs, and right up here it is. Right, we just received it. So it's quick and easy as that. I can have now my FileMaker solutions talk to Claris Connect and leverage the entire array of automation and integration that Claris Connect brings to the Claris platform. So with that, I will hand it over back to Doug. Hope you guys enjoy it.
Thanks, Ray. So before I forget, and so that Rosemary still like me, there is Claris Engage 2024 in February of next year. So running from the 6th year, it's running in Austin, Texas. It will take place at the Apple facility that is out there. So we're hoping to be able to actually see you. Once we have information in terms of booking hotels, all of the information, it will be on the community website where we can actually sort of give you all that info, and then you can start booking your flights and hotel rooms. And so I'm hoping to see a lot of you out there. So that's it for my part. Two things that I want just to share, seeing on the chat and people asking. We've actually got two release notes sort of web page on our site. I'll just quickly put them in the chat. It has a few. It has a bit more information on some of the minor fixes that we've done in terms of bugs and stuff like that. So you can go through it at your own leisure to actually find anything that could be bothering you in the kind of or the previous version of FileMaker 19. So as Ronnie is saying, is questions are free. Ask away. Got roughly about 10-15 minutes to answer any of your questions or anything that is driving you nuts with FileMaker.
Hey, Douglas, that was a fantastic presentation. I just wanted to confirm something. I've heard people have thoughts that Claris is moving away from macOS for FileMaker server. That server may not be available on macOS in the future. And I was really happy to see that it was there in that slide. Is that true, or is that just one of those nasty rumors
It's more, yeah,
Rumors
it's
that's
more
going
like a
around the
nasty,
streets.
yeah, it's more like a nasty rumor that's going out. So the thing is that we'll basically, for as long as we can, we'll basically have a Claris server or FileMaker server, sorry, for the Mac, for Windows and for Ubuntu. We're not moving away from it. There's a lot of stuff that we need to in that actually requires us to actually have a FileMaker server for Mac, so we're not going to sort of move away from that at all. I think the reason it's the rumors coming out is there's been rumors on the Apple side of it that they are looking to actually move more into the desktop environment and not actually having people use the Mac hardware or Apple hardware for certain purposes. And I think that rumor's been going on for about a year. I don't know when it came about. Obviously, I don't know why people are actually saying that, but I think that's why sometimes people think. But no, we're not dropping the Mac.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So there's always the question of a FileMaker client for Linux coming about. So we won't do a client, but what we're going to do is try to give server more of the power that Flow has. So they work pretty much on the same stuff, but there's a lot of like script steps and especially when you need like control of context and you be able to actually sort of visualize the layout that FileMaker server currently doesn't do. And so one of the things that we're thinking of is instead actually creating an extra client, which means more support for us, is to actually bring more of the power that we have currently on FileMaker Pro to the server. And so that way you're getting more power to Pro, and it's going to be easier for people to actually do a lot of that. Especially we know that a lot of the requests for people running FileMaker client on Linux is to actually have it run as a robot. If we give more power to the server to be able to work closer to being a robot, then it's going to be basically make everyone life a lot easier. So there won't be a client for Linux, but we are making an effort to actually have a more powerful server. So I'm just going through the listing, the chat if I see anything else. Yeah, for performance skill on server, well, we didn't want to actually break any forward or backward compatibility with the two script steps. They work kind of similar to the same, but they have a bit different. So on the POSS, it has both the option to be working on asynchronous or synchronously, whereas the new one is purely sort of asynchronously. So we didn't want to basically start sort of creating issues where when we want to do updates, bless you. When we're going to do basically updates to both the script steps, we could actually go and take both script steps in different direction if we had to. So in order for not to actually have issues long term, we thought let's actually have them separately so that it gives us more freedom to be able to actually do what we need to do for the community on the long term. So that was the reason behind it. Yeah, so for all the announcements, I invite you to look at the release notes of how they could be working better for you. For the persistence cache, is it going to be quicker than before, or the consistent? No, it's still basically going to do what it does before. It's just the persistent cache, having been said on the side, is not going to be affected by the FileMaker server daemon crashing. So it will still be there, and you'll be able to actually sort of rebuild the file properly. Add support version. Oh, 80. Sorry, sorry. Getting to joke now. Sorry. Cool. Yeah, and the blog. So as Rosemary is pointing out, there is we created a page on community that has all the blog, all the videos, podcasts, and pretty much anyone on the planet. I invite you to actually sort of look at it because it's great to be able to actually see all the great stuff that people are sort of talking about, the great demos that people have created. There's a lot of great content around it. So, and especially on the onward transaction, There's some great stuff around it. So if you're thinking of using it and you don't really know how to actually start, check those out. There's some really good ones out there.
And I will add on that
Good.
roundup of content. If there's something out there you've seen that's great that I don't have in that roundup, please send it to me. I'm in the midst of composing a follow-up. I mean, so that was everything current as of a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. And second, I did drop a link to a survey in the chat. You know, as you may all know, Claris is getting more disciplined about feedback and measurement. And if you think that it's great to get product managers out talking to you on a more frequent basis, let us know that it's valuable. So yes, please complete the survey.
And so yes, on Tony's question on get modified, yeah, we are working to expand, to get it to do more stuff, so that with the onboarding transaction, they're more they work better together, and then there's more things to be done around it. So that, because currently the issue is when you go through all the various blogs and even our blog, to be able to actually do the various custom function, they're kind of long-winded. There might be sort of issues some places. So we're trying to see is how do we make it a lot even easier, so that it's kind of straightforward for anyone to actually sort of get a proper audit logging system without having to actually create a lot of custom functions and calculations, stuff like that on the system.
Hey, Doug, that's terrific news, because the primary use case would be editing, say, an invoice and related items. And then if the get modified could pick up changes to the related items, then you could write an optimized log, you know, so you could pick up the, you know, the things that were modified in the related, because the scope of the current function is to the parent window. So the fact that you guys are working on it is brilliant. It's almost like you're planning ahead over there. Good job.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes we plan ahead. So yeah, no, it should be quite cool eventually once we actually have more stuff around it. And,
yeah, putting the pieces together.
Yeah, and the fact that we have more, I mean, we have a huge amount of like user groups that we talk to. We have a lot more we have a lot of feedback. We have some great sort of demos. It's giving us some ideas on what we thought we could do, and it's like they're saying, well, maybe if people want to use that way, let's see how we can go there quickly as we can. So.
Hey, Doug, Dave Knight had a question earlier about performance enhancements. Can you speak a little bit to where those are and how we might enjoy them, how we might test them?
Yeah, so that's always the tricky thing about performance enhancements, is the policy of both our parent company is it's really hard to be able to actually say specifically where it is. What we've been working on is, so if I go on the WebDirect sort of subject, what we've been writing is we've been completely rewriting the way that ListView actually works in WebDirect. It was kind of slow before that. And so what we did is we actually sort of pretty much rip it apart, start from scratch, and actually be able to redo it and give you more options. So one of the options that we're giving you on the WebDirect is to be able to actually select how many records you allow, or you want your system to actually bring from the server to the WebDirect sort of session. So there's a config file where you can actually specify that. So that it gives you a bit more power in that environment. The other thing that we're actually working on is around the chattiness of a FileMaker. So FileMaker, as you all know, is extremely chatty. You do a change somewhere, it has to actually replicate everything across the board. In some cases, the way that we actually work, especially on the caching of the CSS, and that's more for WebDirect, but we're trying to see whether we can do some of the stuff on Pro, is to use a bit more sort of the caching environment that we have, so that FileMaker doesn't have to be so chatty. If nothing changes in your CSS, there is no need for basically especially the WebDirect session, to check with the server if anything has changed. So we're trying to figure out ways to actually limit the amount of traffic that's go back between the client and the server, so that everything is more responsive. We started working on figuring out ways to actually have, even in terms of how we send data from a table. So currently as a record, you get everything from that table sent across apart from the calculation and the containers. We're trying to work on different ways to actually send data, it's less chatty. We've started doing some work on FileMaker 2023, but it's very light. But this is where we're trying to actually get to. So main thing to say for the future is giving more power to the server so it can handle more or the work that the client is doing. And so that way, the data that gets sent to the client has less of the extra information that currently is needed to be actually able to do that. So the first step that we did was the sorting. So the sorting can be done by the server. And if you have enough power, the sorting is done on the server. So it's quicker basically for the client to be able to actually view the data. Same for the summary fields. So that basically all the work is being on the server. So that's the early steps where we're making enhancements. And along the long-term journey is to actually be able to really sort of get FileMaker server to do a lot more of the work for the client.
Thank you.
And the idea is that you have hack systems, you have ways around it. The idea is to have the system built in the Draco engine, so that the Draco engine does the work it's meant to be doing a better way, and more responsive and less issues with low connection or high latency on your system, on your network. So we're trying to actually sort of handle all of that.
Question?
And that's, yeah.
Just wanted to check if you had addressed any of the functionality related to reading and writing external SQL tables from FileMaker. In my experience, it's quite slow. There is a limitation of the number of fields in a given table, and if you exceed that limit, you can't read or write any records at all. Has anything been improved in those areas?
Not on that front. No, we haven't really worked on for this version. We haven't worked on the ODBC sort of driver that actually handles a lot of the information. So, but we are trying to increase the speed of actually transaction through the drivers. Like namely, OData is one of the stuff that we are actually doing, but there's work that we want to do as well on better integration of outside data inside the FileMaker, so that the speed is actually improved.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both, Doug and Ronnie, for those presentations. We really appreciate Claris. We always appreciate Claris coming and sharing this kind of information with our group. And as you can see, a lot of people are here to hear what you have to say about it. So thank you, and hope to have you back again real soon. And thank you too, Rosemary, for arranging everything.
Always our pleasure.
Thanks, Bob.
Note,
Everyone.
my weekend starts in 2 minutes, so I'm going to leave you and have fun, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, that was great. I think there was a lot of great information in that. And next up, we have Jonathan Stark, who I am going to make start 1 minute early. I hope you're ready, Jonathan.
I'll gladly. I've got 40 slides in 30 minutes. So
40 slides in 30 minutes. All right. Well, that
We'll
may be a
see
new
how that
record.
goes. Yeah.
Well, with no further ado, then, Jonathan, you're going to talk about how to be an old dog and still learn new tricks. Although you don't look like all that old of a dog, but we'll let that slide.
I'll take the compliment. Flattery will get you everywhere. It's okay if I share my screen, right?
Absolutely.
All right, let me get that rocking. I fear this is going to be a real left-hand turn from the last talk, but hopefully it's helpful. Share screen.
There we go.
All right, and I want to share a particular window. Let's see how we do that. Maybe it's not going to let me. All right, so we'll just go like this. All right. How's that?
Good.
Big black slide?
Yep.
Great. All right, so I'm going to blame Chris Moyer in advance for this talk. This is his idea. But I have to admit, I love it. I love this idea. And thanks, Chris. Good to see you here. Let's jump in because, like I said, we've got a lot to go through, and I do want to leave time for questions. I think I have 45 minutes altogether, so we got good news and bad news. Change happens. That is good and bad, I think. But it seems to be accelerating, at least to me, that it just seems like every year changes are coming at us faster and faster. And it could be a function of the gray hair, but I don't think it actually is. I think things are actually changing faster. And I blame these 5 things. So first we had the internet. Maybe the first time I saw it was in the early 90s. Certainly it existed before that. And then applications started to get built on top of it, like first email. I remember the first time someone in their 70s said, "Hey, could you help me set up my email?" And I was like, "Why?" And then the web came and brought more rich media, and then social got built on top of that, and then boom, mobile hit, really with the introduction of the iPhone in 2007, 2008. That particular launch, that piece of technology, smartphones, not just any old cell phones, are currently estimated at close to 7 billion users worldwide, which is, I think it's like 87% of the population of the planet. So you can see as these technologies sort of get established and then build on top of each other, you get these massive adoption curves. I used to give talks about this all the time in my previous life, and one of my favorite statistics is that more people have smartphones than have bikes or toothbrushes or pencils or are literate. So it's widely regarded as the biggest technology wave of all time. Into that context, we get AI. AI finally works with a user application. So ChatGPT and Friends has taken the world by storm in the last, it's only been like 6 months. In the first 5 days that ChatGPT was launched, it had 1 million users. In 2 months, it had 100 million users. And about 6 months later now, it's got over 1 billion monthly active users. So that makes it by far the fastest growing consumer app of all time by a mile. I mean, TikTok took 9 months. So today, what I want to do is help us all who are wrestling with this increasing velocity of change to wrestle with 2 questions. First, how do you know when, not if, how do you know when to make a change? And how do you know what change to make? So I'm going to use myself as an example because it's the one, the history I know the most about. I hope it will be a little bit instructive. But in the 90s, more or less, for about a decade, I was a pretty serious musician. And then in the 2000s, I was basically a coder. Inside of that decade, there were a lot of pivots that seemed really important to me at the time, but in fact, I was really just a coder the whole time. Started out with AppleScript, then FileMaker, then PHP, then the web more broadly, and then the mobile web. And then in the 2010s, I considered myself a consultant. I was doing advisory services instead of typing semicolons for money. So that was a big switch for me. And then more recently in the 2020s, I am doing business coaching for people like I used to be. So people like FileMaker developers or other kinds of web developers or even accountants, lawyers, marketers, basically people who are independent professionals. It's a pretty strange transition, I think, from each one of those things, especially the last one. So I want to drill into it a little bit because I think it might help you identify trends in your own experience that perhaps would turn on a light bulb for you. So each one of these changes started with what I would refer to as a Eureka moment. Some were bigger than others, but like this is like a lightning bolt hits you out of the blue and you're like, whoa, that is really cool, or that is really interesting, or whatever the case may be. It's just like it's a big thing that hits you, and I can point to specific ones for each one of those transitions that happened to me. The first one was in probably about 1985. I would have been about 14. Our next door neighbor, Robbie Radigan, came over with his electric guitar, and because my brother Matt had a bass guitar and an amp, and Robbie didn't have an amp, so he brought the electric guitar over to plug it into an amp, and I did not let that thing leave the house. I immediately fell in love with it. He didn't really care about it that much. I was bigger than him, so I was like, this guitar is staying here, and then you can come over and play it through the amp whenever you want. And I did not put that thing down for 10 years. You know, obviously I got new guitars and so forth, but it's very easy for me to remember that love at first sight moment when I saw that guitar. The next Eureka moment for my coder era was I was working at Staples Corporate doing sort of like IT support for the internal advertising agency, and I had a really tedious job building catalogs, paper catalogs in an application called Quark Express, and it was horribly tedious and inefficient. And so I asked the tech guys there, you know, could you, you know, do we have like a database like Microsoft Access or something? And they said, no, but we have FileMaker. And I built this thing with AppleScript and FileMaker that kind of automated my job. And my manager was like, how did you finish 4 catalogs in 1 week? It usually takes a month to do one. And I was like, oh, I made this little tool. It's like a builder thing. And she was like, could we roll that out to the rest of the department? And I was like, sure. So then the Eureka moment was one day I was walking around the cube farm, which didn't look that different from the picture on your screen. And I saw my application on screen after screen after screen after screen. And I was hooked. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. The next one was in 2007. I watched it live. Steve Jobs came on stage in January 2007 and announced the iPhone. And I was like, that's what I'm doing from now on. I had established myself as a mediocre but good enough to make money web developer at that time. And during the announcement, after this amazing demo that you probably all saw, he said that developers will be able to build apps for this using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I was like, so great. It ended up not being true, more or less. They ended up having an app store, but that wasn't the initial plan. And I got hooked right in that moment. And I was in line for that first iPhone. I got that thing. I digitally speaking, I took it apart. I figured out everything I possibly could. I became obsessed with it immediately. And then the Eureka moment that kicked off my current phase, the sort of coaching phase, was when I realized that hourly billing was nuts. I saw with like almost a religious clarity that costs don't drive price, price drives costs. You shouldn't, charging for inputs like time or deliverables was a huge mistake. And to me, this was a revolutionary concept that kicked off an exploration that, I mean, it was like Alice in Wonderland. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, and the whole world was the same, but everything looked a little bit different. It was like I had X-ray vision or something. It changed really everything that came after that. And we're going to come back to this later. It's pretty important. All right, so if we look at this sort of, it's not really, it's sort of a timeline, I guess. Each one had this sort of epiphany moment or this Eureka moment that I can point to that planted the seed for what was to come. It wasn't always instant. Sometimes there was a long lag time in between, but I can remember the moments that it hit me. Now, using rectangles for these colored rectangles down here for musician, coder, consultant, coach, it's a little bit misleading. It's a little bit more in reality like these ramp up, ramp down kind of curves where, you know, I was still considering myself a musician in the 90s and into the 2000s maybe, but at the same time, my coder stuff was kind of ramping up. And same as I ramped down as a coder, kind of ramped up as a consultant, and then as that ramped down, I was ramping up as a coach. So there's sort of these tailing off and tailing up, or ramping up kind of a feeling to it. So what's weird about this is, or what's notable, I suppose, about this is that in these overlapping periods, there's a lot of uncertainty, doubt, just a huge lack of clarity, frustration, a lot of excitement and exploration and fun also, but there's just it's like a very chaotic period where you're kind of like getting bored or tired of an old thing, or you're worn out on the old thing, and this new thing is really exciting, but you're doing both at the same time, and it's very chaotic. If we zoom in to these, in preparing for this talk, I really tried to deconstruct this and zoom in, and it's actually not as simple as just saying like there's this bubble with some overlap with the next bubble. There are at least 4 different tracks that I've noticed going on. In retrospect, analyzing it, I've noticed that there's at least 4 different tracks going on that are important and have an unusual and important interplay with each other. So I'm going to zoom into one of these little spaghetti things. So if we zoom into one of them, the 4 tracks that I've noticed are, there's this Eureka moment on the far left, and then there's some period of time as the obsession ramps up. And the obsession to me involves, what does it look like? It looks like me spending after hours and weekends and things like that, doing activities of exploring this new space, researching it, doing proof of concept type stuff, trying to talk to people about it, trying to get my head around it. After that, if I keep at it long enough, then milestones will start to crop up. And a milestone for me is something that you release publicly that other people react positively to. So those could be big or small. In fact, they almost certainly are going to start off small and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that kind of reinforces your obsession. As time goes on, if that goes well, then I notice that it's this lagging experience of my identity starting to shift to the new thing from the old thing. And this can be really hard for a lot of, I coach people on this, and a lot of people are like, no, I'm a coder. I just want to make more money as a coder. And I'm like, well, maybe if you thought of yourself as more of a consultant and not someone who just codes all the time, then there'd be a lot more options for you, but their identity can really hold them in that spot. And even for me, it's very uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable. I did not want to give up the musician identity. I did not. But eventually I did it, and it was great for me. And then last lagging indicator probably is some kind of profitability, not just income, but real profits. So you're making enough money, or you're making a lot more money than you were the previous phase. But as we'll see, that phase doesn't always come. All right, so to kind of summarize these bullets, we've got Eurekas that can lead to obsessions. Identity comes sometimes way after the obsession, certainly way after the Eureka moment, and that can be very uncomfortable. As you get more milestones, so these sort of publicly released things that people react positively to, it does help to cement the identity. You're like, oh, it might be okay to be a consultant and not a coder. I might not lose my edge if I'm advising people instead of actually being in the code editor all day long. Profitability becomes super important, because if you don't find a way to profitably spend all your time doing this new thing, you're going to run out of money. So if you don't have some way to support yourself in this new space, it's going to be hard to justify spending all of your time doing it, right? You got to put Cheerios in the bowl. So if you do want to do this as a job and not just a hobby, if this new thing feels like it might be your next big thing, then you need to find a way to make more money, more profitably than the old way, or you're just going to get pulled back into the old way. Profitability will almost certainly come after milestones, but not always. Sometimes you hit a home run, but it's generally speaking not that way. So if I was going to put these in order, roughly, it'd be first the Eureka, then the obsession, then some milestones, then your identity starts to cement, and then hopefully you can find a way to make it super profitable so that you can keep on doing it because you're having a ton of fun in this new thing. Unfortunately, it's generally not that clean of a process. So if we look at this, if we go back to the sort of spaghetti graph here, it's all like the same. It's like, oh, first this happens, and then a static period of time later this happens, and then a static period of time later this happens, and they all go from 0 to 100 in this nice pretty curve. It never goes like that though. I'll look at musician, for example. So in 85 or whatever it was, I saw Robbie's guitar and the obsession hit immediately. I had some small milestones, and then I had some bigger milestones, small things being like, oh, I figured out eruption. Not that I wish. I figured out some simple song, or I think I kind of sound okay, or I got a new sound out of the guitar that didn't make me want to puke. All these little things, and they lead up to things like, oh, I played a party and didn't embarrass myself, and then oh, I'm in a band, and then oh, I'm on stage and like the crowd clapped, and the milestones keep getting bigger, and at a certain point the identity kicks in, and when people ask you what you do, you say I'm a musician, or I'm a guitarist, or whatever you say. I'm a songwriter. With me, in my case, the profitability never happened, and in retrospect, I know why, or at least I have a very big clue as to why. If I was going to go in a time machine and talk to my 20-year-old self, I'd be like, I think I know what's going on here. But it becomes extremely frustrating. So when you can't do the thing that you love so much, you just love this activity so much, and you're trying so hard, and you're putting 18 hours a day into it every day, and practically giving yourself carpal tunnel syndrome trying to do this, and then you can't afford to keep doing it. In my case, I had to take a job in a warehouse humping cases of wine around on a two-wheeler, a hand truck, and I was only getting paid $200 a week for it at the time. This would have been like 1992, 91 maybe, and that was easily 10 or maybe 100 times more money than I was making as a musician. So it was super frustrating because it felt unfair, and the world is against me, and I'm trying so hard. I deserve to be able to do this full time, but it just doesn't work like that. And I'm going to talk more about what the problem was shortly. It brings us back to hourly billing is nuts, but really that's the way I articulated it at the time. But now I see that the real issue is that cost doesn't dictate price, value does. So by practicing all the time, by honing my craft incessantly, obsessively honing my craft, I was increasing my costs dramatically. So this is all the time you're putting in to sharpen your axe, to, back in the woodshed. So this is all cost. The time you're spending on your developing your skills, or your talents, or your tips and tricks and so forth. But the market doesn't care. So if you need to make money at this thing, no one cares how hard it was for you to do it. The thing that they care about is how much value they're going to get out of the outcome. And the value is what dictates the price. So if something's worth nothing to, let's say my CD, it was worth nothing to someone on the street, well, I can't justify them giving me $10 by saying, well, I worked so hard on it and it took me so long and I've been practicing for so many years. You should really give me $10 for this. It doesn't work like that. They need to see some value in it that is higher, the value being higher than what you're asking in terms of the price. So if the value is $100, then if the CD was worth $100 to somebody, they would have definitely given me $10 for it because that's a good deal. The problem that I had back then was I wasn't doing anything to create value. I was spending all my time increasing my costs, and I never thought about the audience. I never thought about what I wanted the audience to do. Not once did I think, hey guys, how are we going to make these people dance or cry or laugh or mosh? Never thought that. It was always like, are other guitarists going to be impressed when I nail this solo? That's not the way to think about it. So I'm going to give you a secret. The secret to making $1 million You ready to get your pencils out? Create $10 million worth of value and capture 10% of it. I mean, it sounds stupid, but when people first get on my mailing list, the first question I ask them is, what would success look like for you? And a significant portion of those people will reply with some kind of annual income. They'll say like, oh, if I was making $1 million a year, that would be great. And I reply seriously, but lightheartedly, no problem. First, create $10 million worth of value, and it'll be easy for you to make $1 million a year. But a lot of people are not in the mindset of how am I going to create value for other people? The same way that when I was a guitarist, I was just trying to impress other guitarists instead of making the audience in front of me do something. Like, be glad that they were there. Be glad they came in and spent the time and the money to watch this silly rock band. So let me define what I mean by create value, because it's a poorly understood term in my experience. So I would summarize it as this: help people you like get what they want. So value is wrapped up in making other people's lives better in some way that is meaningful to them. So they want something. They want it. There's a desire. They can't get it. That creates tension. They find out that you can release that tension. And that release of tension or frustration or whatever you want to call it is worth something to someone. They will pay you money to make this pain go away or make this opportunity real, get their vision down on paper, whatever it is. So if you find a really so basically you're looking for problems. If you find a really expensive problem that you can solve doing something that you enjoy doing and you're pretty good at, you don't even have to be great at it. But if you find this thing that is really expensive, painful for someone with a lot of buying power, and then you can solve that for them, you need to be good enough, but you don't have to be the world's greatest guitarist to like make someone feel connected and cry in an audience. You could be halfway decent. You can probably think off the top of your head of a bunch of entertainers who play guitar or sing. They're okay. They're not like stellar technicians, but I don't want to name names, but you can certainly think of people who are just great at playing the audience instead of their instruments. That's where value comes from. All right, so this brings us back to our original questions. These are the questions I want to help you answer. So the first one was, how do you know when to make a change? Again, I'm going to go back to the music example. If you are feeling, you've been doing your current thing for a while, you're feeling frustrated, bored, maybe even cynical or bitter, that's a sign that it's time for a change. It's probable, I'm going to guess, it's probable that you're in that downward slope, but you haven't got a new upward slope that for your next thing. Then the question is, how do you know what change to make? What is going to be your new obsession? And my answer for this is that you need to find something that you're so excited about that it's going to push you through that uncomfortable overlap, the uncertainty, the frustration, the lack of clarity that happens as you're transitioning from the old thing to the new thing. There needs to be enough excitement. You have to be excited enough about it to push through that and stick with it to hopefully get to your first milestone, and then maybe your second milestone, and then you start to feel less like an imposter and more like this new thing. And then if you can use that new expertise, new as it may be, to make people's lives better, then you've got a decent shot of creating the profitability it'll take for you to sustain that activity so that you can keep doing it. We did it. How long was that? Woo! Great. So we have time for Q&A. I have another slide that has a bunch of other takeaways that I think are less important. I'd rather talk questions. If people have questions, I'd rather do that. If people don't have questions, I can do one more slide of takeaways. But yeah.
I have a question.
All right.
Lynn Allen. I absolutely agree with your selling the value proposition rather than the cost of your hours. And I have, over the years, attempted this more than once, unsuccessfully, I might say. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's me. maybe my sales skills are not good enough. The first few times I tried it, I would go in with vague, well, this will make your life easier. This will solve your problems. And I saw that wasn't working. So I created more value on the front end by analyzing their processes enough to get metrics. Well, this process takes you X amount of hours. I can reduce that to 2 clicks and a 5-minute wait. This will save you X amount of dollars over the years. Still could not sell the value proposition that I deserved a part of their profitability. I still had to sell it as an hourly or project rate, depending on the project. So how do you get over that hump of convincing people that you are, in fact, the answer to their prayers?
Great question. The short answer is don't try and convince anyone of anything. Ask them questions. So in a sales meeting. So my example, my accountant still types up and sends me invoices on letterhead. I'm sure that makes everyone in this room cringe, but she does not see this as a problem. She sees this as a benefit. She thinks that's a differentiator for her, and it's not a problem. We can look at people and see that they have what we believe to be problems, but that does not mean that it's keeping them up nights. My personal trainer doesn't walk up to people in line at, Baskin and Robbins and say, you could really use a personal trainer. It just doesn't, as you found, it just doesn't work usually. The only time it does work is when you accidentally pick something that they were already worried about. So the approach I take when you do get someone on the phone or in person or whatever is to ask them the why conversation, I call it. There's 3 kinds of questions you would ask them to first diagnose why do they want to do this thing at all, and then why do they want to do it now, and then why would they hire someone expensive like you to do it. And if you rotate through these versions of these questions in a really polite, curious, genuine way, without interrogating them or putting words in their mouths, and especially not leading the witness by saying like, oh, wouldn't it be better if you did this? And then you kind of insert your services there. If you can get those answers to those questions out of them and find out what their biggest challenge is with regard to, say, workflow or whatever it is, then, and they have like, oh yeah, this is a really big problem. And you say, well, why is it a really big problem? Even though you recognize that it's a really big problem, you need to find out why they think it's a really big problem and what they care about changing. What needle is it that they want changed? And if you can find out why this thing that they need done is probably really the most important thing, why they need to do it now and they can't wait, it's urgent, and why they want to hire someone expensive like you, probably because they tried a bunch of cheaper things and wasted time and money with something that didn't work. If you can find out all of those things, then you can get a sense based on the size of the company and the magnitude of the change that they want made, so the transformation from point A to point B. You can get a back of the envelope calculation of what it might be worth, and then you come up with, in this case, I would come up with 3 prices that are a fraction of that, and then you would come up with a scope last. So not what they asked you to do. You'd say like, well, this is probably worth $100,000 to you based on what they said, not what you sort of, the words you put in their mouth, but based on their own words that you uncovered in the conversation. This should be worth about conservatively $100,000 to the organization every single year. So wouldn't it make sense to pay $10,000 to help move that needle? Or if you want more of my intervention, $22,000, and we could consider doing something a little bit more in depth, or $50,000, and I'll really, really get in there. You'll have more of my attention, more of my whatever it is that you sell. And then framed in that way, you're really just echoing back to them what they told you in the sales interview. It becomes very difficult for them to argue it. Really, the only thing that tends to happen at that point, there are a few things that could happen to make you lose the deal at that point. One would be that you horribly miscalculated the value. Another would be that you are not differentiated from someone else and they see these prices and they're like, wow, we can get this done cheaper. So you need to be meaningfully different than the other alternatives. And Yeah, I mean, those are really the two big things. I guess the general low credibility or low trust, or they could find the offer not credible. Like maybe they believe that you're capable of it, but they think that their organization will drop the ball, so they don't really want to invest this much because we know it'll end up being wasted, and that's a different problem. But that's where I would start questioning in the sales interview. Don't assert anything in the sales interview. Ask innocent, naive sounding questions over and over until you uncover the business outcome that they're hoping to achieve.
That brings up another good point, in that at the point where I'm doing this is I've already done a lot of discovery process. I'm intimately acquainted with what the end users need, but the decision maker has different goals.
Yeah.
Probably did not focus enough on those goals. I was telling him what his people needed, and he
didn't care what his people. I'll just hire more people.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one of my one of my classic questions in the FileMaker days was that someone would say, "Oh, we really need to streamline our invoicing," and I'd be like, "Why? Why don't you just hire more people?" And they'd be like, "Well, we thought about that," and they'd give me the reasons why they don't want to just hire more people. I'm like, "Couldn't you just hire 2 more people?" I'm like, "Yeah, but we don't have the seats. I don't want to manage the people." So now I immediately know that the reason they didn't hire the people wasn't the money. So immediately, I mean, that's at least $100,000 worth of value if they would have hired 2 people, except for these other reasons, not the salary piece.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Let me see if I can stop sharing. That would help. And then I can see your bright and shining faces.
Jonathan, I think cool. Lynn asked a really good series of questions there that I think a lot of people wonder about. I'm sure you get those questions all the time.
Yeah.
What are some other pitfalls that you may have run into involving value-based pricing, like maybe further down the process when you start delivering, and maybe you find, I don't know, I'm flying by the seat of my pants with this question, but
sure.
Maybe you find that you underestimated the value, and that caused a lot more overhead on your end, commensurately. You know what I mean? Like the problem runs much deeper than you thought it did.
Right.
And the way you encapsulated it, maybe they thought, oh, we're getting much more than you were really prepared to deliver.
Right. So what happens if there's a lot of scope creep, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I guess yeah, scope creep or let's just call it scope creep.
Okay. So the thing with the proposals I would write in a value-based way, and before I even go there, I only would use a value price proposal on a non-trivial project, not like a 2-week thing or a month-long thing, but like 6 months, at least 4 months, but 6 months, at least $50,000. It's just not worth anybody's time to go through this sort of Socratic questioning kind of thing if it's, a minor change, like, oh, we just need a report added or something like that. But if it's a meaningful project that is important to the business, and you've got through this conversation and you can see that conservatively it's at least worth $100,000 to this business per year, then I would, using that number, I would say, all right, for $10,000, what scope will I put into a $10,000 budget that I would be fist-pumpingly happy to do? And I create the scope last. So I roughly guesstimate the value, I come up with a price, and then I make a scope in it that I would probably do for $5,000. So if I'm off by 100%, I still don't feel like I'm losing money. So you build in margin. And if you anchor the price against the value, it becomes attractive to the client. They don't care how long it's going to take you. If you could snap your fingers and have it done in one day, they'd be a lot happier. So to your point, you want to be, it helps if you're experienced. I'm sure everyone here has been doing this a couple of years. So if you kind of have this spider sense around the kinds of questions you need to ask to uncover huge scope bombs almost in the meeting. So like certain ones that have blown up on me in the past, not too bad, but bad enough that I remember them, would be like, oh, we need this localized in Japanese too. Obviously, it needed to be in Japanese also, in Spanish. So a question that I would ask is like, is this just going to be in English, or does it need to be translated into other languages? Another one is, are there any unusual regulations that we need to comply with at the state or federal level? Because that can really get scary. Another one is, will any third-party APIs, any new third-party APIs need to be used here? I've had third-party companies make big promises to a client that were actually completely false. And that would end up burning me because they're like, well, we're behind schedule. And it's like, yeah, the API is not ready. So there, if you're experienced, you will start to find these things out. You'll be able to uncover them very easily in a sales interview, the more experienced you get. And the other thing is, instead of trying to make the scope as big as possible during the sale, make it as small as possible. You want it to be as small as possible, because when you're giving a fixed price, whether it's based on value or something else, you're taking on way more risk, which is where all the reward comes from, but you are taking on more risk. So the idea of taking on a $500,000 project was unappealing to me. I would much rather break it into phases and say, well, let's start with a MVP, or let's start with a prototype, prove the concept, that kind of thing. So decrease your risk. There's all sorts of things you can do to mitigate your risk, but there's some other approaches too. But that's basically my answer there, is like, build in a lot of margin, use your expertise to uncover landmines in advance, and scope last, so that even if you're way off, you're still fine.
Another quick question. When it comes to the payment terms on something like value-based pricing, do you do like a 25, 50, 25 kind of thing, or is it all paid up front, or all at the end, or how do you think is the best way to handle that?
Yeah, I ask for 100% up front, which surprisingly, lots of times people would just say, okay, check's in the mail. Other times people would suggest different terms. And that was fine, because what are we negotiating now? We're negotiating payment terms. We're not negotiating the price. So if you make this big ask for 100% upfront, yeah, like $75,000, $125,000 upfront. Like, what? Are you crazy? We're not doing that. And then I'd say, well, what do you propose? And they'd say, well, what about 50% now and 50% on completion? And you can do that kind of thing. It's fine to. Sometimes I'd be like, this is going to take a year. I don't want the 200 grand up front. Part-time for a year, $200,000 project. Let's just break it up into, whatever payments, or a payment plan over the course of like 6 months. If you're not happy in the first month, I'll give you the money back and we'll just cancel the whole deal. But if we're happy at the end of the first month and we're moving forward, then the payments will just come on a regular schedule. And when the software is done, the software is done. It's not going to be tied to last payment.
Okay. Great. Dave.
Yeah, Jonathan, I've gone toe to toe with a number of value-based proponents over the years, and I absolutely believe it belongs in some conversations in terms of how to work with specific clients, specific settings. I think and we use it at times a lot, and at other times it's not appropriate. I think that the points that make it a challenge at times, number one, it goes against the grain of market-based. I buy a Chevy truck in this town or this town or this town, they're largely going to be in the same price range. So I think you're at times pushing against that. But I think, to your point, differentiation is going to help you establish that value thing. The biggest challenge I have, number one, with a team of developers or people who are providing estimates, to be able to have a uniform approach to establishing what the value is. So it's, if you're a sole proprietor, you can establish what that value is and those metrics and what my time's going to be worth and what the benefit to the customer is. Those get a little gray area as you try to scale that up. I don't know that there's a lot of larger consulting firms that do a tremendous amount of value-based stuff unless they've got, you know, one or two gurus that do the wave the wand over things. The other challenge that we have is a number of our customers know each other. So from a standpoint, oh my gosh, I built an invoicing system for this customer and it was $80,000 and the other guy got it for 40 because there was far more value on one side of those things. I can't have that happen in a public forum or in a position where customers might be discussing things of that nature.
So what's the question?
The point being is I think there's a time, I think there are situations where value-based is probably not the best option, a little harder to scale, sometimes a little harder if customers are interacting with each other. I think those are situations you might agree that you have to be a little bit more market-based as opposed to swinging really hard one direction or the other.
It's more of a business model question than a pricing question, I think. I mean, McKinsey switched to value priced, and you know, they have a lot of employees. So you touched on earlier the critical factor, which is differentiation, because if you're seen as apples to apples with the next person, then no matter what, you're going to have downward pricing pressure. It doesn't matter how you price. It could be your hourly rate. It doesn't matter. You have to stand out from the crowd to make more money. Full stop. It's like one of the main subjects. It's almost more important. It is more important than value pricing is positioning. Way more important. You can't do anything if people are just going to see a list of FileMaker developers and sort by price. It's just not going to, you just can't get anywhere because they can't tell the difference in a meaningful way between you and the next person.
Right.
Well, then what's the one thing they can tell the difference? The price. It's the only thing you've left them. So you need to be different for it to work, for any pricing to work, for your business to work. You need to be different. The employees thing is a red herring. That it's not actually a problem if you have real margins. So I've done entire episodes on, you know, Build a Better Agency. There's a podcast, entire episodes about that. It's a long talk, but it's orthogonal to pricing. And then the last thing is, and this might be what you're looking for, is that I don't think value pricing is the only way. I like it for big projects.
Right.
For things where I'm giving the same invoicing system to everybody,
right.
Just price that. It's like a productized service or a product. That's fine too. I mean, most of my business, I haven't value priced myself in probably 5 years. I've switched over completely to productized services, subscriptions, and products, and it's a different business model.
Right.
So
right.
for service providers, and the last thing there, the way that you scale up a firm, a services firm let's stay with firm. The way that you scale it up is different than you would scale up if you were pricing or billing hourly. You would scale it differently. When you scale up a firm that's billing hourly, a big piece of it is adding headcount so that little bit of margin you get off of each employee accrues to the owner, right? The way that you would scale up a small firm that you didn't want to add headcount is to get bigger clients. Every time, get a bigger client, a bigger client, a bigger client, because as their buying power goes up, their ability to
acquisition costs go down, a lot of those types of things.
Yeah, all of that, right? Again, differentiation becomes really important here. But the apples to apples thing with the clients comparing themselves to each other, there's no such thing as the same two projects. Like if you do a project for local pizza place and you do a project for Domino's, the risk is completely different with Domino's. The level of effort is completely different with Domino's. So yeah, if you've got two identical businesses in the same town that are in the same market and they both need an invoicing system, just make that a product. And if you want to scale up with value pricing, the way is to get bigger and bigger clients every time.
Yeah, I think your point about differentiation is a good one. I think that's really that's the hard part of doing what we do is you know, convincing people, hey, we're different, we can do it better, we can give you what you need possibly at a more competitive price, et cetera. You know, that's really hard to sell. A lot of times you don't know what you're up against in their thinking in terms of other technologies or other services that they may be considering. They tend to, most of the prospects that I sell to keep their cards very close to the vest on that. because they don't want to hear your arguments for yourself or against anything else. And you know, and which is fine. They can do that. You just have to be confident about what you're doing and what you can do for them. I think is a big part of that.
Yeah, you actually just touched on several very interesting things. I don't know how much time we have, but just cut me off when you want to. But the one thing, if people are playing cards close to their vest, it's probably not going to be a good client. They don't trust you. So I would just say no to them. 2, that requires that you're getting a lot of leads so that you can say no to 50% of them, and then just cherry pick the cream of the crop to value the ones that trust you and have a really expensive problem that you know you can solve. You know you can move the needle for them in like 3 different ways. And what was the third thing? Sorry, there was another thing you mentioned in there that was like, oh, niching down on a vertical. So if you niche down on a vertical and you do, I don't know, workplace solutions for dentist's office, or, you know, there's plenty of people in the community that have done this, then you do know what they're thinking. You do know what they're considering because you're an insider in their trade association or at their conferences, and you see what everyone's talking about, and then you become empathetic. Yeah, I was almost said you become one of them, but you become empathetic with what is top of mind for them, and then you can use their language, and then guess what? You'll appear meaningfully different between, you know, there'll be a meaningful difference between you and a generic software developer or even a generic FileMaker developer. That's just one approach, but it can work.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, we are out of time. I really appreciate you coming and doing this. It's very fascinating. So well done, and thanks, and hope to have you back again sometime.
Hey, Chris. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Bob.
All right. I'm going to pause things here for a little bit, and we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with Jeremy Brown and Thinking Inside the WebViewer in just a little bit. All right, everybody, welcome back. Next up, we have Jeremy Brown, Thinking Inside the WebViewer.
Hey, hi, I'm on. All right. Let's do my screen.
Oh, one thing, I apologize. Jonathan Ref has next month's meeting, so if anybody has anything that they'd like to cover, please talk to him. Thanks. Sorry, Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy, and we are going to take a look at the WebViewer. I've spent the last couple years, many years now, actually working with this object, and you know, I think I've been able to produce a lot of great things. I've been able to, you know, make a business out of this. We can talk about that in a minute, but I thought it would be fun to really just take a look and go inside this WebViewer, this little object, and just review all that it can do within our time space. I might not be able to get to everything, but this is at least a start. And the reason I want to bring this up is because we get so enamored with the cool things that we can do with it. We really need to take some minutes to study its technical capabilities and see where it's at in now FileMaker 2023. So I want to dive in and take a look. Just quick, a little bit about me. You know, you guys, most of you know who I am. I used to work with Proofgeist and learned a lot there. And now I do this thing by myself, integrating magic. My goal is to, well, I'll share my goal. So I've got 2 different areas that I try to maintain: the business side and then the community side, the JS and FM. So there's a lot of spaces that I'm, you know, trying to develop and nurture. My overall goal, going on my own, you know, listening to Mr. Stark's podcasts and actually talking with him on one of his about a year ago now, is to to focus on this WebViewer, to focus on this idea of using JavaScript and FileMaker so that we can do whatever we need to do with that technique. It's a little odd. It feels very odd to focus on one little object in FileMaker, but there's a lot of power around it. And that's, you know, we're going to look at that and what it can do. But I'm a former teacher. I taught for 15 years, and I really enjoy that aspect of a given workday. And so I've I always was interested, Jonathan was talking about, what is your passion? What are you good at and feel like you can make a difference with? And mine turns out to be, I think, this idea of nurturing the community to talk about JavaScript and FileMaker. We've got that JS and FM community. I am available to provide trainings for people and give them the knowledge and the techniques to work with the JavaScript. And I also build widgets for FileMaker developers who just don't have the time, who want to use it but don't have the time. So it was, this is where I'm at. This is kind of my niche angle. This is where I'm at, and hopefully it'll keep going. The agenda for today is to just look at this WebViewer and see what it's about, and look at the technical part of what it can do, review its quirks that appear whenever we use it, and just continue to be inspired by its power and the capabilities of it. I play with this all the time. Every single day I fire one up and I'm figuring out what more I can do or what the issues are with it. And I invite you to, as we talk here, to share whatever quirks you have encountered. The quirks that I'm going to bring up today, the technical parts of what I'm going to bring up today, are stuff that I deal with every day in my work, and that the people that I work with in the community are coming up with. People will call me up and say, hey, there's an issue. What's going on? Why won't this work in WebDirect, for example? And so I give them the technique and away they go. So yeah, feel free to share what you have. Just have a bunch of assumptions here that, the WebViewer is a powerful tool and we can certainly use it in our daily use. It's not something that's a special thing anymore. It's pretty accessible. And I'm convinced of that. And I know a lot of people here and not here are as well. So it's good to just, reiterate what we can do and just bring it up again. So let's dive in. These are the 10 or so things that topics that I would like to talk about that deal where the WebViewer gets technical. None of this is exciting. None of it is on its own is not exciting. What we can do with it is really cool and useful for your clients. But this is all technical stuff. So it's sending data in, updating it, updating any WebViewer on a layout, pushing data out, and so forth. We'll get into details with these. I'll show examples and how this is working in practice. But these are the ones that I will come up with that I want to bring up. To that end, I would love for your help. We're going to, I would love for you to participate in a little community and help out guiding how this goes today. I've got all 10 of those ready to go, and I would love for you to just help me decide what is the order. So I'll have a question posted there, and I'm interested in looking at these techniques just off the surface. If you know a lot about them or you're not sure about them, what are interesting to talk about to give a good amount of time to, so we don't run out. So if you could join that space using your phone or the link that I put in the chat, we can determine which ones we'll talk about first. All right, do a couple more seconds here. Looks good. I do plan to have to show a lot of examples, not so much for the example sake, but for the technique sake. And again, share your thoughts and knowledge as well as we go through this. Scroll down. All right. keep on going. I will check back on this frequently, but it looks like for now, at least the first one would be taking a look at how to use the fact that we can use the WebViewer as a piece of UI in our or user experience or problem solving in our work. So let me go to that one. All right, so one of the things that the WebViewer can do is be used as a UI element. It's my belief that we can do anything with it, and I'm slowly showing people that that's the possibility along with others. But really, we can do anything with it. It can replace or add to anything in an app. And it's not really that difficult to put this into play. Some of the other stuff the techniques that we'll get to certainly lead up to what we can do here. But we might as well start with, just a bare bones, like let's use it as a UI. You can decide if you want to use it, as an entire layout or just part of a layout. It can show related records or some sort of interaction for a particular record. We all started with MapQuest, probably. I think, wasn't that the first one in there? MapQuest or Google Map? I can't remember which one was first in there. But we all started with that for a particular record. When I designed a student database, that's the coolest thing that I had put in there in a tab. So it could be either one. The hardest thing to deal with is what we can do with it is actually use a lot of styling and CSS and frameworks to get it as close to our app's look and theme as possible. So I have a couple examples of that. The first one here, I will go to that. Go to that. This first one here is something I work on myself. This is my training course CRM, or I guess it is a course CRM. It's a course management system, but it helps me write the courses, write the lessons, and then I can use the API to push this to my circle community where the JS and FM lives. So right here, I've got a design that shows a course and all of its lessons. The one I'm working on now is working with the data tables library and just really focusing in on the different features of that. So over here on the right, I have replaced a portal showing related records with something that comes from JavaScript using as a WebViewer. And my eye probably needs some work, but I'm getting close to how I want this to look as far as the rest of the set. There's not a whole lot of difference between the stuff on the left and that data table on the right. So it's possible with anything that we do with JavaScript and with the WebViewer to get it pretty close to what we need in our apps. This one here, well, we'll talk about that later, but there's another one. I've got this one here. What's this one? This one is, oh yeah, okay. So this one here. So this one here is I just took the one of the files from the starter kit in FileMaker 19, and it's I turned this into some sort of meeting. It's a meeting app, and I just have an event in here. And I wanted to add some better functionality than just the picker like this. So instead, I added a date picker that can come in here and goes away, and it becomes part of the app. It becomes so subtle, so ordinary that it's just, let's use it and move on. There's nothing special about how that felt, because it's just solving a problem. It's just getting a date range and putting it in there. So I can add this. It's a card window, obviously. It's a WebViewer, and it's using the capabilities of the JavaScript to put the dates in there as we go. By the way, ask questions. I do have in the polling, you can certainly ask a question if you would like in there. You can put it in the chat. I've got both open. So feel free to ask anything about this as we go. So this is just another example of using it as a ordinary problem-solving tool to get the job done and move on. All right, and then let's see, I think I might have one more. Yeah, this one here. So this one is something I built for, this is actually the prototype. So it's not in perfect condition, but I built this to handle some complex picking that a client wanted to do. It has 4 columns. It takes all the data from a particular table, and it does a summary. It just shows us the unique ones, and it allows them to go through and do the picking and then put it into a shopping cart and then move on with their day. So again, it doesn't have to look special. It doesn't have to be magic. It's just solving the problem, which is the most important thing, getting the job done to what the client needs to do. So these are, as a UI, it's also a tool to solve problems. All right, so that is one thing that the WebViewer can do for us. It gives us all those possibilities, and it's much faster than FM code. That's certainly true about the WebViewer. So we'll look at that. All right, let's see what else we got. What's next? The next one, of course. Yes.
Did you want questions as we go?
Yeah, please do. Please say your question. Yes.
This is kind of a very, very specific little UI question, but I was talking with some colleagues the other day about how, if you got objects in your layout that all have rounded corners, and you have a web viewer and you want to put a rounded corner on that web viewer, the contents of the web viewer really wants to be square or rectangular. Mm-hmm. It really wants to exceed those rounded corners and just poke out. Is there a tip or trick to doing that and making the web viewer respect the shape of the boundary?
Good question. I guess the first thing I would do is design the web viewer, the HTML inside of it, to have rounded corners. Maybe the combination of the rounded corner inside of the browser, inside of the HTML, will allow for the rounded corner to match the actual web viewer object.
Just using the background?
That's using the what?
Just using the background rounded corner?
Yeah. Or you could put it in, well, it would be a CSS thing. It would be something you would have to style on the parent element that's holding everything in place inside of the web viewer. So that's an interesting idea. I've never thought of that. What I would do, I guess what I would really do is I would put a border around the parent element, make it rounded, and then I would hide the border that is the web viewer. So remove that border and just make it round inside of the web viewer. I'm not sure that that's an answer, because I'm not sure that I know. I've never thought of that about that, but it's certainly worth exploring. So let me know. I'll come back to that, or I'll solve it.
A bunch of us thought this should be really simple to do, and then a bunch of us all hit the same brick wall. So
there are some quirks with this, and this may be one of those, is that it in some cases you have to work to make the web viewer active. The card window that I popped up to pick pick the dates, I actually solved the problem that I was having before. But in previous versions, you have to, once you open the card window or the popover, you have to make that thing active. And that's an extra either click that someone has to know that they have to do, or it's triggering it via a script, which is trivial, but it is a thing. I'm thinking that with what FileMaker, with what the app provides us now, that FileMaker, the perform JavaScript in a web viewer, that seems to take the active object, or it takes the object that you want it to do. So it feels like it's making it active in one step. When it does the perform script, when it does the perform function, the perform JavaScript, it sort of, I think it makes it active. I just thought of that today, so I'm not really sure, but I'm going to explore that and see. I've never had any problems with this in recent versions of FileMaker. Scroll bars are a pain in the butt. when you have an extra scroll bar that's just hanging around in a portal looking thing and you don't want it, maybe a portal you do, but if you're trying to display a chart, you have to really work with the styling, the padding, the margins to get this right. So that's a quirk. This is interesting too. It caches data for each record. So if you have a web viewer on like my my JS and FM training stuff, and I scroll through those records really quickly, I'm going to get the web viewer is just going to flash and go crazy because it's caching the data of a record. There's just a weirdness there. So there are ways to solve this, but just out of the box, if you fetch data for that web viewer on a record, and then you quickly go to the next ones, you're going to have some overlap issues. Okay. Very good. Let's go to the next one. Trigger functions from FileMaker. All right, so let's take a look at this. With a web viewer in a FileMaker app, we can use FileMaker scripts to trigger the JavaScript to do something. Once JavaScript is loaded in there, that's what I'm talking about, we can make changes to it without the dreaded refresh that wipes out the entire web viewer and makes it, reloads the whole thing. In my examples I'll show, you may have a sorted state, you may have like a filter going on of some records and a table. And if you want to use that if you want to update it from something, in previous versions of FileMaker, you would cause the whole thing to refresh, which would be a problem. Todd tried to solve this, and I think Beeswax did too with something that kind of bridged into there. We don't have to do that anymore. We can use the native functions of FileMaker and the native script steps to update that. We can really leverage then a library's API to make these changes. Again, I'll show those examples. And we have absolute control of the web viewer from FileMaker in regards to this. So here's an example right here. This is a part of my data tables course. We were looking at the data tables library to display records, and we can use, here it is. This is what I was talking about. If I'm coming in here and I've got a filter for companies in Florida, without upsetting anything, I can add a new row to it, to the web viewer, to the table without any problems. So it looks like the data just came in from someone else adding it or editing it for that matter, but that can be done. I'm tapping into the library's API to make a change and to update what it can do. There are some other examples that I work with my students on, but we can easily show and hide columns. We can destroy it for some reason. We can clear it out. We can load it with new data. This one is interesting where we can, from FileMaker, we can do what we would do up here, but we have freedom to do whatever we want. So yes.
I just recently implemented this for a crosstab report in one of my, and it was really easy taking the stuff from online and integrating it. Took about an hour. But I really like to get to the CSS and manipulate the appearance. How does one do that?
Yeah, that's part of what we can do. And you have to get into the library, get into the code, get into your HTML and make those minute changes that would make it look exactly like you want. I do have some examples of that. And the JS and FM training one showed that possibility. It's about reading the library's documentation, finding the classes that you need to update, learning how to override classes that are already coming in, styling that's already coming in. And that just takes some time. So, but it is completely possible to make that report look exactly like you need it to look. In the interest of time, I'm not going to dive into those details, but it's completely doable. So Glenn, I'm sorry that's not an answer. I can't get into it right now. It will take too long, but yes, it can be done. I'll show examples of that. Okay, so this is triggering functions from FileMaker. If I bring up the script workspace or the script debugger, I am using a FileMaker script to run a function that I've got in here. I know it's really small, called show hide column. I'm telling it which column I want it to hide, and I'm passing that in, and it's doing the work over there in the JavaScript. or FileMaker has this perform JavaScript in a WebViewer step that's widely known and talked about. In the JavaScript, there is a function, a library. Sorry, in JavaScript, we would run this function here, show hide column, and that would tap into the library's API and pass in the name of the column to hide, and then it would toggle the column to be hidden or shown. So those are just some overviews of it, but it is doable to make these changes. Do I have one more? Let's see if I have one more. Yeah, this one is just a silly one. In my office hours, we were talking about how to take shapes in here and build a UI to try to build something with this. And I got excited about it and started to build this functionality so that I could take this and use the API to change it from FileMaker. Again, using that same pattern to perform JavaScript in a WebViewer to run a function that taps into the API that does what it needs to do. So this is within our grasp to be able to make changes, to call functions from FileMaker into the JavaScript to make changes. All right, any questions, comments on this? There are some quirks, and please share if you know of any quirks in this space and this that we need to understand. So I think it seems like Claris has done all they can do, but there's still some weirdness around this. For one, in your JavaScript, and again, I'm going to be general about this because I could spend an hour on each one of these topics, and that's out of scope for right now. But the function itself that's written in the JavaScript needs to be placed in a part of the browser where FileMaker can reach it, and it's called the window. It's the top level part of the browser, and FileMaker can only get into that space. So any function I write needs to be placed at the window level, and it needs to be available for, and that's where it gets shown. I'll just show a quick example of that. Here's one of my code bases, and right here is the window.loadTable function that is put at the window level. And then that's where FileMaker can reach it when it uses that perform JavaScript in a WebViewer. The other quirks are that the WebViewer must be loaded with all of its code, including the library that FileMaker stuffs into there, before we can start to access these functions. That window.loadTable function, if I call it too soon, FileMaker, I'm going to get an error in the script side. It's going to say I can't find that function. I can't find that variable. So we have to deal with the loading of the data. And the way that I handle that is by let's see if I can show that. Let's see, where is that? Right here. I'll just pull up this one. The way that I handle that is by that's what you need to see. In my load WebViewer script, I load the WebViewer from some HTML, and then I pause for a brief period of time, a half a second. That probably could be reduced. Do any people have better experience with this, that they don't need to do this, or there's a better way to do this? But this is what I'm using, and it seems to work okay. Any thoughts on this in particular, this quirk? Is there a better way around this? No. All right. So there are some ways to handle this, to remove that 1/2 second. We'll look at those in other possibilities. But when you first load it, you need to let it rest for half a second before you can actually start to use it. All right. And the WebViewer must be present on the layout somewhere. This is a weird idea. When you're using a WebViewer, It has to be on the layout, which makes sense if you're trying to show a chart, you want it to be on there. There are some instances where you don't want the WebViewer, you just want to use it as a calc engine. And so we just have to work around this idea that it needs to be on the layout somewhere. That somewhere is pretty vague, and I meant that because in FileMaker Pro, you can put it off the bounds of the layout. And for any layout that's used in WebDirect, it seems like the WebViewer has to actually be on the layout that's called in WebDirect before that WebViewer can be accessed. Okay. Let's keep on going. Any thoughts or questions? I don't see anything. All right. All right, so let's keep on going. The next one was handling large data sets. As far as I know, in my experience working with, good question, Howard, does Windows still not display transparency in a WebViewer? I don't think Mac does either, does it? I don't think it does. I don't think any WebViewers, oh, Mac does, Howard? Okay, I haven't actually tried that. So, because your background would be a transparent inside the WebViewer and then it renders that. That's a good thing to look at. Never experienced that. Okay. As far as handling data sets, in the work that I've done all over the place, JavaScript can handle almost any data set that's thrown at it. I don't know what its limit is when it comes to the data that is thrown at it. I have passed in 58,000 records before to process 9 different ways and produce 9 different charts. That was a little, the charts themselves kind of rendered slowly, but I don't think that's the limit. I think it's just, I'm not sure what the limit is. Once the data comes into the JavaScript, it can handle it. And as David said, it's much faster. Collecting data is really the bottleneck. That's not really a capability. I should have put that on the other screen, but it is something to think about. But JavaScript itself can handle these large data sets. And because FileMaker can be the bottleneck, I know why I put this on there. Because FileMaker can be the bottleneck, we have to think about why do we need to pass in 50,000 records into the JavaScript in the first place, or 100,000 or 1 billion records. In very many cases, if you're trying to do a list view is probably the most common reason you would have 50,000 records or 100,000. And if it's really having problems with FileMaker, JavaScript can handle it much better, but JavaScript has a way around it that makes it so much easier. In this case, I'm using the data tables again. I'm only pulling 200 records, so this isn't going to be comparable. But what we can do with the WebViewer and with the code that's inside of it is actually overwrite this. So when I passed the data in, the only thing that I passed in were 10 records. It's telling me that there's 206 records that it found in the table, but it's only giving me the first 10. Every time I do a search here or a page here, and let's just do paging to be fast at this. If I hit the page button, the JavaScript sends to FileMaker a query that says, it's literally the execute data API query that says, I want some records. Here are the records that I want. Again, it's really small. Let's try to make this bigger. As best as I can, it's saying, I want you to pass me only 10 records, starting with the 11th record. Here's what I want you to find in the fields, and I want you to return those. I can leverage the data API, the execute data API script step now to use what is capable of in JavaScript to only fetch the records that I need. This library allows us to basically turn FileMaker into a place you store data. Oh wait, that's what it is. It allows you to fetch data from it one at a time rather than having to just load all of it in. So if you do have millions of records that you need to show, you could simply show 10 records out of that million, and no one would be the wiser that you're not passing all million records into the JavaScript at the same time. So with the capabilities inside of the WebViewer, we can do that. We're using here, the techniques from FileMaker I'm using are the FileMaker.perform script inside of the JavaScript. I'm using FileMaker's execute data API script step, and I'm using the perform JavaScript in a WebViewer. All three of those work together to make this happen. So I don't have to worry about a million records. I can worry about 10 at a time. Or when we do a search, I can worry about just these records. It's only found these records out of millions of records. It found those. All right. There is something to be said. I think a quirk that I would have for this is that it's we're only limited to really to how FileMaker can retrieve the data for us. The execute data API script step is faster. I don't know any speed tests versus execute SQL or any other ways, but I have found it to work. The first time seems to be the slowest, but subsequent times are much faster. Obviously, if you have a complex query from here, it may get challenging. If I'm looking at New Jersey, I want the 7th page and I want to show 50 entries out of a million records. That's a lot that the data API script step has to handle. But so I'm not sure of the limit, but it's worth. I don't know how many people have a million records that they need to throw into a list view. Maybe that is a common case. Okay. Thoughts or questions about this particular one? Corey.
I was just saying I probably have some instances coming up where I'm going to need to have a list view of a million or so records. Okay.
Now, you need to show all million of them at the same time, or can it be handled in a paging system?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
I think my company is not used to a paging system in that sense, so they like to see everything all at once. But I think I could certainly convince them that, hey, it's going to take several minutes to show that, as opposed to, let's filter it down a little bit and show you a smaller set. Then they might go for that.
And there may be no reason to. There may be other things you can do. If the data doesn't change that often, you can cache the data. I'm not sure what caching a million records would feel like into a field, but there could be ways around that. And who knows? Maybe the execute data API script step can handle a million records. Has anybody tried a million records or more with the execute data API script step? No. Okay, well,
no matter what, you're going to have to break that up into chunks, because it would take a long time just to scroll through a million records. Why would anybody want to? You must have some kind of filtering that you have to apply front before you even display one record, right?
I think the data API has a maximum number of records you can return, like in a cursor.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll,
It does for sure, but I don't know if the script step is different. You're talking about that versus actually calling the data API from outside. I don't know if there's any different or not, but you definitely have to break it into chunks when you're calling it from outside.
So the trade-off would be show a million records on a list view, just a normal FileMaker list view, and deal with the scrolling issue, or build something that can fetch the data in chunks and display it in a place where there's no scrolling problems, because this is just all text. It's all loaded into the WebViewer. There's no issues with there's no issues anymore with how the data will flow in here. So I guess that would be a trade-off, and that's worth exploring and seeing what could happen. There certainly, for the execute data API script step, I have found that there's a limit of the number of records and the amount of data you're returning for each record. the amount of characters or something. I have gotten to the point where I've that thing has choked and it says, I can't return all of this data. It's going to be truncated. So I've had to reduce the number of columns, fields to be returned, and so forth. And I find a sweet spot, and I just pray that they don't add many more fields in the table. But I don't know what that is. I don't think there's been any documentation or any written word about that. So could be exploring it. All right. So this is possibilities. This is a possibility with the WebViewer. We can also, the next one in the line is pushing data out. From the WebViewer, we can tell the WebViewer to send data back to FileMaker. That became so much easier in FileMaker 19 than previously. I kept having to look back at the syntax that Tony had written up on one of his infographics. I don't have to worry about that anymore because we have that library I mentioned, FileMaker.perform script, that will pass the data back. So let's take a look at an example of that. Let's see here. Oh, so the data comes in. We can push it. We can do anything in the WebViewer, and it will can send data back. It calls a FileMaker script, not a function, and it accepts the data as a script parameter from the WebViewer. So this is a good example right here. Simple chart. When I click on one of these, no, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. Let's try this one instead. All right, so this one I built is again another prototype for someone, another kind of version of the search. I think it's a little bit more responsive, or maybe not. So we can choose some items here. We can put in some information about it, select some stuff, and then send that back to FileMaker. So I'm using a button to send the selected data back to FileMaker. So now it can be used in a search and so forth. All of these are using all of these patterns. I'm just trying to isolate it in one, but you've seen this happen a lot already. So this isn't that exciting anymore. But we have complete power to build something here to allow people to enter data or click on item, and it will spit out the data that it needs to. Let's try something here. Nope. I don't know what's going on. All right, so that's pretty simple. Again, this is accomplished using what FileMaker, actually in this case, this is that data tables one. I'm using something that was built by Josh Willing called FMGopher that handles a couple things that I had mentioned as far as the loading. So FMGopher is a JavaScript library that will make sure that the FileMaker.perform script is available to the WebViewer before it will use it. And the way that this is set up is a async function so that I can wait for the data to come back from FileMaker before proceeding and pushing it into the table. So this is the pattern that is used, but this is how I can send data back to FileMaker. For the C3 charts, just grab one here and see if this one has got it. For the C3 charts, yeah, right here. So one of the options in the charting library is to add an onClick function. This onClick function does a lot of things, and then it calls what FileMaker gives us that injects into the WebViewer. And I can call this script and send back the data that I want it to go back. So we have the technical capabilities to do this. We don't have to run into any URL issues. We don't have to run into version issues of that FMP URL or anything like that. We can just call this and let it run nicely. All right. I'm not sure that there were any quirks. There's probably quirks. There's always quirks. Oh yeah, so I mentioned some of this stuff. If you're sending back if you're sending data back that's an object, you have to prep it for re-entry into FileMaker. FileMaker will accept it at the top of the script via the script parameter, but in the JavaScript, it's actually a JavaScript object, and FileMaker doesn't know what a JavaScript object is. It just, the objects that we manipulate and see are really strings, or they get passed into the WebViewer as strings. So we need to pass it back to the FileMaker, to FileMaker as a string. In this example here, I am prepping the data. I'm constructing an object right here with some information about what was clicked on, and then I am prepping it for re-entry into FileMaker so that FileMaker can accept it and know what to, and then be able to process it from there. So that's one little quirk. Again, it's not hard to deal with at all. It's just got to remember to wrap any objects or arrays back into that JavaScript function to get it to work. And then you also have to consider, how is this data coming back? Where is this coming back into? Is it coming back as a result of a click where nothing else is happening in FileMaker, and it can just go into a field or a display in a custom dialog box? Or is this data part of a long script where some stuff was sent to a WebViewer, the WebViewer processed it, brought it back to the script, basically like that perform script on server with the callback now? We have to handle the flow of the data going into the WebViewer and coming out of the WebViewer, and we can handle it with the two options that we have inside of the JavaScript. So these quirks are completely, all of the quirks that I've mentioned and we've talked about are surmountable. They're easy to overcome as long as we know what to do in those circumstances. All right, let's see what's next. So next is preview data in real time. Looks like we're going to get to a couple more, and then I'll stop here. The preview is it's my most opinionated thing of anything that I've ever worked with, and that is how you develop your JavaScript as efficiently as possible. You can spend a lot of time you can spend a lot of time with JavaScript. You can spend a lot of time with FileMaker. If you try to work with the JavaScript inside of FileMaker, it creates a whole host of problems. We're all about efficiency. We want to get the job done as soon as possible. So it's vital that we find efficient methods. And the way that I talk about all the time is something called the JavaScript development environment that lets us use modern tools to do the work that we need to do. So we can use a modern tool set to help us with our coding. Here's an example that I've got, and I display this, do this all the time with people and with myself. This is what I use to create widgets for people. It's VS Code on one side, FileMaker on the other side. I can come into my VS Code, start up a development server, come over here to FileMaker, start up this dev mode, and then anything that I do over here in FileMaker, in JavaScript, will be reflected in the code, the WebViewer over here. This is a highlight example. If I were to come in here and just quickly do some highlighting, then I am, I'm seeing it. I'm in development mode right now. I don't like the purple, so I'm going to come into the CSS and make a change and say, I want my background color to be, I don't know, I think deep pink is a color. And I'm going to remove that. I'll remove the text, that. All right, so I've got it rewritten over here in the JavaScript. I come over here back to FileMaker, I rerun it, and actually deep pink isn't a word, or I misspelled it or something, so it defaulted back to what it needed to be. So I'll just put it in pink. So that's a color. So I reload it and there we go. So I'm developing in real time. I'm seeing what it looks like. I'm also seeing all of the mistakes that I make. If I start getting a bunch of errors, the console will tell me what is out there, what the problems are, and I can go and fix those. I can debug them. So being able to develop in real time is vital. Using this modern tool called VS Code is vital to getting this work done efficiently, using all of the features of it to help me see the code, understand it, organize it, and not make a mistake. My first work of this was trying to write this JavaScript in a FileMaker field. And it was awful. I didn't know JavaScript, and I was trying to write the JavaScript, copy code from somewhere and put it into a field. And one little semicolon error or comma error or whatever would just blow up the whole thing. And I would just have so little to go on about what the problem was. The console still tells us what the problem is. It says, hey, you're missing a semicolon or a comma or something, but it's really hard to find in the JavaScript. Whereas if I'm over here in VS Code, if I'm over here and let's see if I can make a mistake here. Let's say let's do this. Let's say I misspell this word. So it's instance. I'm going to start to see some errors. Number one, VS Code is telling me, hey, you wrote this variable, but you're not using it. Is that what's going on? Are you okay with that? And I'll be like, no, it was supposed to be down here. I see, I misspelled the word. So VS Code by itself is very good about helping us find the errors. And then of course the WebViewer the console will be extra good for that. Very good. All right, Douglas says, I've seen a few articles where someone says, process your large JSON data, JSON blocks in the WebViewer, but I haven't seen where libraries for this are being shown. So you process your large JSON blocks in the WebViewer. Yeah, that's a complete capability to use the WebViewer as a calculation engine and to process the data in that way. Why don't we take a look at that one next here? So we can use this WebViewer as a calculation engine to handle things that FileMaker can't do as fast. I think generally it can perform a lot faster. I don't have any numbers to throw at you, so sorry about that. It does have to be on the layout. We mentioned that before. In my version of this, what I like to do is I like to just write the functions inside of the JavaScript and then call them one at a time, whatever I need them to do. So I may have a VS Code file of 50 functions, and I'm just using the WebViewer to call them whenever I need one to process data. I'll show one as an example here. In fact, it's right here. Let's take a look at this. So here's an example. Let's see what's going on now. Let's open that. Oh, I can't open that. Okay. So how about I go here and I find it. I've got a ton of these. So JSON to CSV. Let's open her up. Hopefully this is the right one. Yep, it is. All right, let's go to FileMaker. All right, so here's something I put together for someone, taking a JSON object and processing it in a different way to form a CSV file that can be then exported. This is just in the field. And I do have something, actually, I meant to show this one where it's reverse, where you take the CSV and turn it into the JSON. So it's nice to be able to use the power of what JavaScript can do to process the data a lot faster than what we could do or what can be done in FileMaker. So this is completely within our grasp to use this as a calculation engine. It may not be very pretty that I'm, throwing up a card window. The WebViewer is on there. I guess I don't have to have it on there. I could actually have it on this layout. But if I were using this in WebDirect, then I would have to work around that. So Douglas, this is hopefully, giving you inspiration that this can be done. There's, I don't know, is anybody using, do people use this as a web viewer, as a calculation engine, or is it pretty strictly UI? Speak up if you use it as a calculation engine. Anybody? Okay. I think part of it is knowing JavaScript and knowing what can be done with JavaScript to do. So we have to understand what that can be done, what can be done so that we know how to use it. As you learn more in JavaScript, you'll realize, oh, there's a function there's a method that will take my JSON, return a new array, and and have process to pass. It'll loop through all of the records of the array and do something with them. So, all right. Very good. We got one more. Which one do I want to take a look at? We're not doing too bad. We'll look at the last one here, the develop in real time. Tom, good point. Button bars have replaced web viewers as layout-based calc engines for the FileMaker things, right? But if you need to handle large JSON blocks like Douglas had mentioned, then you're, it's best to do it in a web viewer. Last one, data in. So obviously we need to get data in. That's the whole point of this, to show some data. So we have to put that in there. And so there's a couple options with this, and I'll demonstrate them here in the last couple minutes. We can send data in when the HTML loads. So everything, the web viewer is blank, and then suddenly everything appears, the table, and then the data at the same time. We could also fetch data after the HTML loads. In this scenario, the web viewer loads with an empty table, and then the web viewer can go and fetch the data from the table and load it all in there at once. We could also fetch data after some time. So we could set up our system, our widget, to load the initial set of data and then go fetch more data on a regular basis. And then finally, we can actually trigger the data to happen, to refetch on our own. So here's an example in this last one. Got this web viewer here, and as it loaded, it automatically loaded 200 buttons. These are buttons, don't have any functionality attached. It's showing the different companies. So here's one option, it's blank, and then just everything appears. That's completely possible. I could, though, say, hey, I want you to go fetch the data. I want you to handle it in an appropriate way. So I'm going to ask you to go fetch the data manually. Now, I'm doing this with a button press, but the web viewer can do this itself. It can do it once and then just pass all the data in. Or I can say, hey, just go and fetch the data whenever you feel like it. Or, well, after in this case, I set it up for every second. So every second, it's going to go and grab one more record and add it here. Of course, it's not limited to just adding one record. It's not limited to adding anything we want to grab out of the table can be done in this manner. So in this case, if new records are added to a table, you can grab those and push them into here. And it just shows up as new data. So this data that's coming in is using all of the patterns that we've mentioned thus far. I'm loading the web viewer. I'm going to fetch some data. In some cases, I'm going to go fetch the data using a subscript and just pass it all in there at the exact same time that the entire web viewer is loaded. But in some cases, I'm going to leave it blank. So I've got a trigger on here. If this trigger is send in, then it's going to go fetch the data. Otherwise, it just leaves it blank. And then once the web viewer is loaded with its code, I can then cause it to fetch the data as I want. Here's another quick example of that. I can tell it to, rather than put these in column widths of 2, I can say go 4. Let's let's do that. And let's just send them all in at once. This is another example of me sending data in. In this case, I'm sending a configuration that tells it how wide to make the columns. So I'm able to use sending this data in, not only the data that is shown, but any sort of configuration that I would want to make it unique or different for a certain person. Okay, so that is quite a bit. We didn't get to all of them, and that's okay. There's about 4 more that we need to take care of. But these are more that we can do. So the things we didn't take a look at were use as a calculation. Oh no, I did look at that one. Okay, I skipped over that. We didn't talk about updating any WebViewer, but you can have multiple WebViewers on a layout and update any one of them. Not a problem. Just got to understand the quirks about it. It will run on any platform and on any OS, anything that's supported by FileMaker. So we're no longer limited by Windows. It still has a few quirks that we have to work through, but it is, again, it's handleable. And this is probably my favorite one to talk about, handling large code bases, just being able to take a well-created app like that picker that's using React, it's using Tailwind CSS, it's using a lot of under the hood libraries. It's not having a problem because I'm storing it in a field and I'm loading it in. So the WebViewer can handle large code bases from wherever the code comes, and it doesn't matter. So that is a brief touch on what this WebViewer can do. It gives us a chance to pretty much solve any problem that our clients are interested in solving in a performant way, in an interactive way, and all of the quirks are taken care of. We can easily handle them as we know what we're doing. So I love talking about this stuff. I would love for you to be part of the JS and FM community. We only talk about this. We don't talk about primary keys or virtual lists or OData or anything. We simply talk about how to solve problems, the techniques behind the WebViewer and the JavaScript, so that we can build something great for our clients. So that's it. Thank you.
Wow, great, Jeremy. Thank you very much. That was a really awesome, I won't quite call it an overview. Like you said, it's a lot. It's a lot of information. And, luckily this is recorded. All of our FMDiSC meetings are on our FMDiSC YouTube channel. This will be uploaded later. Certainly you'll see it up, by the beginning of next week, if not sooner. So it all depends on when we can get that rendered and get it up on YouTube. But thank you very much, Jeremy, for being a part of our presentations today. Thanks to all of our presenters. I think that was a really jam-packed meeting today. I think we all can walk away with a ton of information on a ton of different topics. So thank you again, everyone who contributed. Thank you, everyone who came today and being part of our group. Really appreciate you as well. And we'll see you next month. Remember, if you do have anything that you'd like to discuss or present, or you've got any ideas that you'd like to share with us, Jonathan Reff is in charge of next month's meeting, and you should reach out to him. Thanks again. Everybody have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye.